So, I just came over here in January. I come from a formal training background. I'm also a college professor at Christopher Newport University. And I really am excited. I really like teaching people. I really get excited about helping people learn things. And we have an amazing team here that Eric has put together. And we enjoy not only teaching decisions, but we enjoy teaching people new skills and teaching people to automate pretty much everything that we can. So that's a little bit about me. And then I'll kick it over to Jared. He can introduce himself.
All right. Well, hope everyone's having a great day today. As Brian said, my name is Jared Rodriguez. You can call me by J-Rod. That's what a lot of people internally here call me as. I'm similar to Eric. I have not been at Decisions as long as he has. I've been here for about 2.5 to 3 years, but I've worn a lot of hats. I've written documentation. I've helped support the product. I've also built some proof of concepts for prospects looking into the Decisions tool, deciding whether it can facilitate their needs. And then finally, I have found my calling being the senior decisions trainer here on the training team. I'm working with some great individuals like Randy, Jada, and then obviously my two bosses, Eric and Brian, who have taught me a lot of skills. And also I'm excited to teach you guys. So if you have any questions, we're here to help you as a team. And that's a little bit about me. With that being said, I'll kick it over to Randy.
Hey, good morning and happy Monday, everybody. So I've probably been on the training team for the shortest amount of anybody. I've only been with Decisions for about 4 or 5 months now. And I don't want that to scare anybody. If anything, that should make you feel pretty good. The training program that you're about to go through is definitely better than the one that I went through. It's made some improvements. We've done that as a team together. However, you can go from knowing nothing about this product to being a competent developer in a relatively short period of time. So I hope that if there's anything you can gain from my experience, it's that. My background is in adult learning and development. So I'm a trainer by trade, and I am happy to be able to use those skills to share decisions with all of you. And Jada.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. My name is Jada. I am the training coordinator here with Decisions. I have been here since last December, so my 1 year is coming up in a few months. A little background about me. I have a background in pharmacy and higher education, and I've been trained in the tool, and I've come from a non-technical background, and honestly, it's a lot of fun, and I found it pretty easy to catch on to. So excited to get this training started with you guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions about any of your credentials, logins, anything, just email training@decisions.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, this team is going to be your resource for the next week, and for those of you continuing on to the developer course, the next 6 weeks, for as much as you can attend with us. So yeah, we are going to be here to assist and to serve you. So all of the courses, all the content that we deliver, we really want this to make this a partnership and an engaged experience with everyone on the call. So you're going to get out of it what you help put into it, and we're going to give you all the resources and tools and time that we possibly can to make this team, to make your training experience great with this team here. And I think you guys are going to have a wonderful time. So I want to talk a little bit then now, talking a little bit about the training approach, and then I'm going to jump over to the agenda to set some expectations about what you can see this week and what you're going to be learning. And then I'll kick it over to Brian to talk about how we're going to deliver that, talking through the LMS and some delivery methodology there. But I like this slide because it's simple in nature, but it delivers a really key point about how we think about training over here at Decisions. So on the left-hand graph, our approach is that the more time you spend in the tool, the stronger your development curve is going to jump really fast. So a lot of our training is kind of geared around that thinking that if you spend time hands-on in the tool, building it yourself, that is going to be the best approach to increase your development skill rapidly. And you'll see here that it is a steep curve. So it starts off really shallow, which means that there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve there. There's some terminology we're going to teach you you. There's some different ways to think about business problems and software problems using the decisions tool to solve those. But once you start to get it, once you kind of start going up the curve, your skills are gonna jump drastically. So we encourage you with this kind of graph here to spend some time with the tool, even if it's hard, even if it's a kind of a slow start. We promise you that almost every single user who's ever stuck with decisions gets what we call an aha moment or a plateau moment, where you really do start to understand, it clicks, and then you're kind of off to the races. You can solve countless problems once you kind of get to that moment of development skill, kind of rapidly moving forward. So that's kind of how we think about this. So especially with this course, you're going to get a lot of hands-on development time, where we're going to not only teach you things in a classroom style environment with the instructors going through some slides and some demonstration portions, but also we really want you to be hands-on there. And that's where the graph on the right comes in. What we'd like you to think about or to use training is we're going to give you all kind of three primary pathways to the brain. Some people are visual learners. That's awesome. We're going to be sharing our screen pretty much the entire time, walking you through and showing you kind of the ways and how to navigate around and use decisions. Also auditory. All of our trainers are good communicators, except probably myself. So they'll be talking you through, explaining it a couple of different ways. If you like to listen in, that's a wonderful resource as well. But obviously the highlighted green one there, kinesthetic. It's probably the way most people learn. It's the way we think is the best way to learn, is by combining all three of these kind of methodologies. But with that, we want you to be hands-on and in the tool and doing it with you. So with that, we've given you all a training server you can use, which you should have received in your initial welcome email. That you can log into and use. It is a free trial server with all features enabled. You're all administrators on that. And I'll have the trainers talk a little bit about where you go and how to log in and set up users and that sort of thing. And that will be available to you through this week and through the end of next week. If you are not continuing on with us, if you're just only starting with the BA course for now, the business analyst course, your trial server will end the end of next week. And I'll be sending you an email warning you about that. So before we dive into those resources and the training server and all of the fun stuff, I'm going to switch my tab over really quick to talk about the business analyst agenda. If you've attended training in the past with Decisions, this was also similarly called beginner training, but internally I've referenced this as beginner training on steroids. We took that beginner curriculum and ramped it up and took a lot more content and context and things that we wanted to give you related to kind of being a business analyst. And so we relabeled it and rebranded it as a business analyst platform. This course is meant for people who are brand new or relatively new to the tool. Maybe you've only used one or two designers. Maybe you've only watched some demos or done some videos, but that's perfect. The people we want here are people who say, great, we're going to give you a clean install of Decisions and walk you through a simple application build. So by the end of Friday, what we will have you build and complete is actually a full application. You will start with nothing and you will end with a purchase request application. And along the way, we're going to be teaching you a ton of classes and a ton of information around, how to do that. So that's going to be what we're doing this week. Most of the time is going to be spent in these classrooms. So our trainers will be here. They'll be going through slides. They'll then demonstrate a portion of the build, and then you will walk off and you can stay on the call if you want and build that portion during a workshop time. There's also a click-through guide Brian will show you that's actually going to walk you through step by step everything your instructor is doing on the screen. So that's the plan for the week, and we'll kind of go into a little bit more about that as we go. But to look at the schedule, just so you guys can know what to expect, today we're going to introduce the class as we've already started to do. Brian's going to talk a little bit about how business process management and low-code, no-code environments really are changing the platform and changing the game for software development, and how Decisions fits into that landscape. So he'll be walking through that. We'll take a short break, and the last little bit of the day is Randy's going to walk you through Decisions. So what is Decisions? What is the use case for it? And then he's going to start by talking through the portal and kind of the user experience and user interface for it, so that we have a good baseline. Everyone can log into your trial servers. You can click a few buttons and play around so that tomorrow morning we hit the ground running. So day 2, Jared's going to be kicking you off with some workflow design and form design. The first half of the day is going to focus really heavily on those 2 concepts. How do you build a flow that controls and automates your process? And then how do you build forms that allow users to interact at portions of this process? At the end of the day, we'll focus on rules. So we're going to build some rules that relate to the execution of the process. How do you route data and route process around, but also rules that interact with users. How do you get users to actually show validations and show visibility type things? Really, how do you control the user experience also using that rules designer? And you're going to start to see by the end of tomorrow how everything starts to kind of work together inside of the decisions tool. On Wednesday, we work really heavily on process. So you're going to start the day looking at process tracking and assignments. How do you finish out kind of a business application inside of the tool or inside of the workflow engine? Going through saving data, tracking that data, creating tasks for people to leverage that data. And then by the end of the day, we start to think about the end of the day, really think about the end of the process rather, which looks at how you report and create dashboards around all of those things to finish things out. That leads us straight into Thursday, where now we start to think about the project in whole. So by the end of Wednesday, you'll have mostly built out a full-scale application. Thursday is going to be what we call kind of the tie-together day. So we're going to talk about user management permissions, how you interact with those things. What are different ways that now you have a built process you can start leveraging and using it, like using CSV files around it or kind of leveraging it in other ways. Towards the end of the day, we'll do some project review and some open Q&A time, and then we do have a final exam that we will be giving you, and we'll release that on Thursday. Friday, we just have some quick time in the morning where we would like you to present your project to us and submit your final grade, and then we'll be ending around noon on Friday. Now, just as a note here, because I say there's a final grade and an exam, yes, we would like you, this is required for everyone to take in order to complete the course and to be considered business analyst, completion. And so with that, we'll have an open book exam. You can leverage the documentation site. You can leverage notes you've taken during the course. And there will be a submission of your final project. So everything you're building throughout the week, we're going to teach you how to export that and submit it through our learning management system. And we will be getting that from you so that we can give you a final grade. It's not meant to be super scary. You're not meant to be a perfect presenter, but we do want to see that you've kind of worked along with us in the course. You've learned something through the exam. You've built the project. You submit that. And that will be your requirement, especially if you're going to move on to the developer course. You must submit and pass this course in order to move on to bigger and greater things. So that's kind of my brief overview. Someone asked, can you show me the schedule for day 1? Absolutely, that's today. This afternoon, we're kind of rolling right along. I'm starting with some welcome and kickoff, and I'm going to hand it to Brian in about 30 seconds here to give some overview of the LMS, the training server, Slack, and some other things. And then he's going to give you guys an initial baseline survey, which I'll let him talk about. All right, let me jump back over to my slides and hit play here. And I will let Brian take over to talk through some housekeeping and also the LMS. So Brian, sir, are you ready?
I am ready, sir. Thank you. Okay, so just some general housekeeping, because I know we've gotten a couple comments about this already about, are the video sessions recorded? Do we get copies of them? Yes, I'm going to show you in just a moment. I'm going to take you into my version of the LMS, and I'm going to teach you how to use our new Basecamp LMS. We do have a public Slack channel that's made for all of our students that you can join, and that's just a channel that allows you to communicate with the instructors, communicate with other students. If you're struggling with something, if you're working after hours on something or trying to get caught up on some work from the day and you're just not sure, you can post in that Slack channel, and usually there's someone available to help you. That's the link right there, and then that was also sent to you in your welcome emails. And so we can also send documents via that. We can send it via the chat. We can send it via Slack. We can, most of the information or any of the documentation, I would say the majority of the documentation you're going to need is also in the LMS, which I will go ahead and demonstrate for you right now. Okay, so Eric's going to let me have the screen to share. And I'm going to share my screen.
Reluctantly, I will reluctantly let you. share your screen.
Reluctantly, yeah. Okay, so if someone could just do me a favor and give me confirmation that you can see my screen.
Yes, sir. We see Basecamp.
Okay, awesome. So this is our new LMS. And basically what it does is it allows us to track all the content. It allows us to track your interactions and engagement with that content. And it's just going to allow it to make it more efficient on getting you information that you need. Now, when you first log into the LMS, it takes you to what's called your learning page. And your learning page is going to look different for you than it does for me. Obviously, I'm an instructor, so I have different courses that I have to that are going to show up for me that I have to be participate in. It's going to show me tests I need to grade or assignments we have to evaluate. But this kind of layout is general to all to everybody who participates in the LMS. So here you'll see your calendar. Your calendar will auto-populate with things that you're enrolled in. So if you're enrolled in day 2, you can click on it and it will take you right there. Or you can go right into your course and see the entire course. Now, your layout may be slightly different because when you're enrolled in a course, you will see all of the, or when you're enrolled in a learning plan, you will see all of the sub courses you are enrolled in, and all of those are things that you have to complete. So I'll talk about that here in a second on what you're going to do with that. Also on your landing page, you will see we've put an iframe to our document site, and we did this so that you guys can have access to any of the technical information surrounding decisions, so that while you're building or working with the tool, if you have any questions, you can go right in here and search it. It does open up another tab. So if I was to click on a link inside of here, let me see if I can find one that links. It'll open another tab for you. And so you can have both open at the same time. Also, we've linked some videos. Jared has a YouTube channel called Making Decisions where he answers questions. You can subscribe to it from here. You can view every video in his playlist. We also have a series of videos from our Lunch and Learns. Our Lunch and Learns are kind of an open forum for all of our students that you guys can join. It's from Monday to Thursday, 11 to noon. And it allows you to ask questions, and it's a historical archive of all of our previous Lunch and Learns, and you can go in there and view those videos. All right, let me just make sure there's no questions. Looking for hands. Okay, cool. All right, so here's how we deliver content through the course. When you go into the course, you'll see in your breakdown on your page, you'll probably see a pre-assessment, and then you'll see the decisions 5-day course, and then you'll see an application upload, and you'll see an exit survey, and you'll see a final exam, and you'll see some of those have a lock on them. And that's because it's not available to you yet. So as you complete parts of this course, other parts of the course will become available. But like Eric said, you have to complete all parts of this course in order to get your Decisions Developer certificate and to move on. If you are planning to move on into the developer community, you'll have to successfully complete this course, including the final exam, to then move on into that course. Let's see, what else do we need to talk about that? Attendance for the classes. So here's how the system is set up. You have to physically attend via Zoom or live in person here at World Headquarters all 5 days of the session. We do, like I said, upload them. So here you see day 1, you see it says join the webinar. It will allow us to upload that, and I'll show you very quickly what that looks like. Here's a meeting we were doing the other day as a test. Here you can see how you can view the recording. So that's what it would look like to you tomorrow when you go back to day 1. You'll just see a recording of today's live event. So it's a tool that you can use as a refresher. It'll always be available to you. The one thing I forgot to mention when I started talking very briefly about the Basecamp is that your learning page is going to be your learning page for the rest of your time as a Decisions user. You can log back in and out. You can consume content as you progress through the developers course and then graduate from the developer course and continue into the community and continue to grow your skills. There's opportunities for you to get other certifications and do other things in the community through Decisions Basecamp. So this will be your one-stop shop for information. When you click on the 5-day course and you see all the sessions, the other tab you're going to see here is called Content. And this is where you can download all the content associated with this course. You'll see this is the agenda that Eric was just showing. You can download the agenda. You'll have the student guide. This is the click-through piece that he was talking about. When you download it, it'll bring up the version 7 click-through guide, and this is just so you can follow along with everything we're going to be doing during training. Also in that click-through, in the content section, is the parent-child reporting import. So when you get to day, I want to say day 4, J-Rod will be teaching you some parent-child reporting and some CSV manipulation stuff, and you'll need these 2 files in order to do those and follow along with that. And that's been provided for you as well via the LMS. And you can download these multiple times, things of that nature. So or is there a time limit? Okay, I'm just looking at a question. So we've got a question here about, is there any place where we can confirm if our attendance was counted or not? Yeah, so when you, let me show you that other example. I know it's not a very good one because it's a test, but you'll see right here at the end of every day, it'll say your attendance has not been recorded. So if you don't join these sessions and you don't attend, you can't. And Eric answered it, yes, you can navigate back to the day, and there it'll say, so it should say your attendance has been recorded, and then you'll still be able to see the recording in there. And then let's say, so here's how the attendance works. It doesn't matter when you attend, but you have to attend the class. So it's not 100% timed. I'm not going to tell you what that percentage is, but if you miss, like I think it was saying, like if you miss the first 30 minutes of the class, I don't think that's going to be an issue. But there is a percentage of the class that you do have to attend in order to satisfy these requirements. All right, are there any questions on the LMS or how to use the LMS real briefly before we move on? All right, Eric, do you have anything you wanted to add about that one?
Yeah, let me, I'm just going to add here, and your trainers will walk you through this, just to remind everyone, there are actually going to be 2 kind of primary servers that you log into. This is the learning management server. This is where you're going to get the links to the videos, you're going to get the documents, you're going to get that click-through guide, the recordings, everything is through our Basecamp, learn.decisions.com. The other server we sent you is a decisions install, and that's on training4.decisions.com. And your trainer, Randy, this afternoon is going to walk you through that, how to log in, where to reset your password, all that good stuff. So just note, big note here, there are the 2 separate servers. This one, the learning system, training 4 is your install of decisions to use throughout the course of training. And also as a note on that one is a shared environment. So you will potentially be on that server developing alongside other developers. And that's just a big note. If you see things getting created in there that you didn't create, it's probably someone else on the server that you're sharing with building. So make sure you're a respectful developer. Don't rename things that aren't yours. Don't delete things that aren't yours. Don't move things that aren't yours. And if someone's kind of encroaching on your space, just let one of the trainers know. We can adjust it and fix things if we need to. But I want to make sure that was really, really clear as well. All right, I think that's kind of it for the introduction to the course. Unless anyone else, any other traders on the call want to interrupt me and speak to something that I missed. But I think that'll get us kicked off and started to begin. So at this point, let's transition a little bit. What we'd like to ask you to do right now is to make sure you can log in to learn.decisions.com, which everyone who's on the call has already done so to join the call, so that shouldn't be a problem. And what you'll see in there is what we call the baseline knowledge survey. And on Brian's screen, you actually saw it there. Under the activities that were upcoming, you saw, or you will see on there, something that says baseline knowledge survey. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to pause and give you about 30 minutes to take that survey, 30 to 45 minutes to take that survey. I'm actually looking at my time now to make sure I'm not too far off. Yeah, we're not too far off. So we'll give you about 45 minutes actually to take that survey. We will come back here around 1:15 to 1:30 p.m. for Brian to kick off the first official class. But what this baseline knowledge survey is it's meant to give us an understanding of where you're coming from, because some people are coming into this course with some previous decisions knowledge, and some folks are coming into this course with absolutely none, and that's totally fine. If you get a 0 on this quiz, go for it. So what this is, this helps us understand how effective training is. And so what I ask you to do is to go take the exam and do your best. If you don't know the answers, make an educated guess, and you can just kind of churn through it and give us that data. That would be tremendously helpful to us in the team, and it'll also help you kind of see what's coming up in this course, what some things you can expect to learn and pay attention to. So I'm going to pause the recording, and we're going to take 45 minutes to do that. Brian will come back in and start teaching the first class right around 1:15, 1:30. Which will be all about business process management principles, and he will go through that as well. Any questions as you're going through? I'm going to hang out, and I think all the other trainers are going to hang out on this call, so just post them in the chat here, or as Jada said, please feel free to email training@decisions.com. That's another way to get a hold of us, or post in that Slack channel and say, hey, I need help, and we'll be happy to help any of those ways. So please go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back here in just a short period of time. And yeah, thank you, everyone. Looking forward to the rest of the week.
Okay, I see it's 1:15. We'll go ahead and get started. I've started the recording again. Hopefully everyone's back. Everyone can see, should be able to see my slides. Can I get confirmation you can see slides? It says business process management, low code, no code software.
That is what we see, sir.
All right, awesome. Anybody other than Eric want to confirm that for me? No, I'm just joking.
Yes, I can see your slides.
There's a statement there about a lack of trust, but then we'll gloss over that.
I'm concerned about our students. You're a host. I want to make sure our students can see, and I'm getting confirmation from the students that we can. Okay, so let's real quick. Let me take this time real quick to just give you a debrief on why we do the pre-assessment. We got a little extra time, so I can do that. So in the past, one of the things that students have responded to in our surveys has said that we don't like the pre-assessment. You're asking me questions about decisions, and I don't know anything about decisions. That's why I'm here. Well, first of all, that's not necessarily true. A lot of people in this group did very, very well on the pre-assessment. Jared and I were looking at the metrics on the during the testing, and there's a lot of people did very, very strongly on that. But there's really two reasons we do pre-assessment. So kind of like Eric was talking about at the beginning, we want to baseline your knowledge. I need to know I want to see how much you're learning. And the only way to do that is I have to be able to see what you know now and then measure it against what knowledge you have at the end of the course. So it definitely benefits training, right? It definitely benefits us to take a sample of your baseline knowledge. But for you, and I know you're going to get upset when I say this, I didn't tell you this before the exam, but for you, what it should do is it should spark some learning. So when you take that entrance exam, you should be looking at the questions going, ooh, this is interesting. This is the kind of thing that I can expect to learn over the next few days. These are the types of questions you're going to get asked again on the final exam. So it's a way to kind of wake you up and get you aware of the information that's about to be given to you. So that's part of the reason that we do that pre-assessment. Is it's two reasons. One, we need it for our metrics to measure effectiveness, but also it's a way to introduce you to material, is to get you to start thinking about what is it that I really need to pay attention to? What are the concepts I really need to start grasping? Like I said, like Eric said, the final exam is 50 questions. You're going to be given 2 hours to complete it. You'll take it on Thursday afternoon. You'll only get one chance at it. Okay, so you can't take it over. So you're going to take it on Thursday. It's open book, open note. Any notes you take during this course, you can use. Any of the downloads that you download, you can use the doc site, you can use any reference that you want. It's truly open book, but you have to complete it in 2 hours, and you're only going to get one chance to take it, and you got to cut a 70 or better. So just think about that as you go through the course. Make sure if you have questions, ask them. Please put them in the chat. Raise your hand. If you didn't know in a webinar, you can raise your hand. I can see that over in the attendees panel. Say someone raised their hand, and then I can answer those. I can answer those questions for you, or any other instructor can answer those questions for you. But I can pretty much promise you that every topic that you are going to learn starting from now until your last series of topics on Thursday is going to be on that final exam. Okay, so let's get started with business process management, low code, no code software. So this is something new. We never really talked about this in any of our other training. We always just kind of assumed if you're coming to us, you kind of understand these landscapes already. Like there's a reason why you reached out to us and chose our tool. We decided to add this for several reasons. And one of them is that this landscape is very, very important to decisions, but it's also important to our clients. And so we wanted to just give you a really cursory overview. This is not a college level class. You're not going to walk out of here being an expert in either one of these subjects, but it's going to give you an understanding. It's going to set some ground rules on terminology, and it's going to, and then we can have maybe a little discussion about it. Give you a little bit more information about how these two philosophies, how this stuff is changing how we do business. Because that's, I think, the big thing to take away from this next lecture is that landscape is dramatically changing, especially with the more prevalent use of low code and no code software, of which Decisions is a member of that space. And so as we start to use tools in business that do this, you're going to see that landscape change dramatically. And so this lecture here is going to introduce some common terminology, and then also help you understand kind of where this fits on a I guess macro level. If you would say, if your business is a micro level, then where would Decisions, or where would low code, no code, and kind of that citizen developer initiative, where would that fit in a macro environment? So first, let's start off by setting some terminology, and let's define what is business process management. So BPM, or business process management, is simply the systematic approach and or study of an automated or non-automated business processes and their influence on strategic goals. So this is the definition of BPM, and that's really all. I mean, nuts and bolts. That's really all it is. Is that it's a systematic methodology for breaking down either an automated or a non-automated business process, and then how does that process influence our achievement of strategic goals. And there's two concepts that you should really, when we look at BPM, it's really got one specific, a very, very pointed objective. Okay, one of the reasons we exercise BPM is that we are trying to improve our business performance with a focus on operational agility. So what we mean by that is, I'm not just trying to get better at what we do. BPM is really centered around trying to make us more agile. And agility means that we can respond to varying environments quickly. Okay, so this is kind of the new concept, the new thinking around BPM that's coming out, and that's operational agility. Our environment's changing. If any of you on this call has not learned anything from what happened late 2019 and early 2020, is that the world can dramatically change overnight. and that we have to, as businesses, be able to operate in those environments and be able to scale or shift business priorities, things of that nature. And so BPM is really about changing some of that. It's about improving business performance, but it's about focusing on operational agility. How do we get our businesses to be more agile and change quicker and plug and play and things of that nature? And it generally, when we start talking about BPM, it generally employs a software BPM suite like Decisions. Okay, we are an entire solution, and so that's one of the other key concepts here that we kind of talk about when we teach business process management. Is that A, it's about operational agility, and B, there needs to be some sort of tool that you use in order to employ it. The next concept that we should get familiar with is something called robotic process automation. An RPA, okay, also called business process automation, depending on the circle that you run in or who you talk to, you may hear it called BPA as well. It's simply the employment of software. So now I'm taking that software that we have, that enterprise tool that we have, and I'm leveraging it to automate a business's manual and human-dependent repetitive tasks. So RPA is anytime you have a process that is heavily dependent on human interaction, but it is repetitive in nature. It's something we do all the time. You know, think of data entry, things like that. These are processes that are ripe for RPA. These are processes that historically have high rates of error involved with them. They're places where I can inject a lot of problems. And this is a great place for me to look at automating or using a tool like Decisions to automate my business and make it faster and more responsive and reduce error. RPA as an industry or as a subset is huge market. It's expected to have a combined annual growth rate of over 21% by 2025. These are metrics from Gartner. So this is an area where you can really leverage Decisions and RPA and BPM in your business to get more return for your investment. So now let's talk about the low code, no code software. This is an interesting piece of this topic because I didn't come from this industry. So people like Eric that have been around it for a long time, it's kind of, I think, taken for granted. They understand like, hey, this stuff's been around. I mean, low code, no code software, correct me if I'm wrong, it's been around since like the 90s, right? Like there's been a market for this stuff for a long time. But the challenge here is that it's becoming much more prevalent. Low code, no code software is simply a type of software that enables fast delivery of applications. That's truly the point of it, right? It's that I need to reduce the production time for application development by traditional code factories or traditional development shops. And it's usually done by what we call non-traditional software developers, what they're now being termed in certain circles, the citizen developer. Right, so citizen developers. Gartner back in, I think, 2010 actually proclaimed that we are all, if you're a business analyst, we are all developers now. That was their big exclamation, is that everyone's a dev now because there's so many of these tools out there. And that was, when you hear Eric, one of the things that Eric used to do with our new hires is Eric used to talk about the history of Decisions. And one of the things that he used to convey to them that I think is very, very good was he would talk about how, you know, kind of the purpose of why Heath Oderman and Carl Hewitt started Decisions. And it was to reduce that gap in development from, you know, the traditional shop of I have an application I want to make, I got to hire a dev shop, to getting it to more people, getting it to the app process user, and then reducing any of the friction there. Instead of saying, okay, the guy writing the program doesn't use the process, so there's some problems when it comes out because we don't necessarily understand the process. That was one of the reasons that low code, no code software that is become more prevalent. A, it speeds development time, but B, it makes the process owner a part of the development process. And that's a huge thing. That going back to that concept of citizen developers. And it's usually, now I guess the misnomer here is that it doesn't mean low code, no code doesn't mean there's zero syntax or there's zero understanding of a code environment. I can tell you that you still have to have some level of understanding with coding languages. You don't have to be fluent in them. You don't have to be an expert at them. But if you understand SQL, if you understand C#, if you understand JavaScript, if you understand any object-oriented programming language, it generally helps because you'll understand why the systems work the way they do, but it's not required. It's it's very, very high level. And then the other part is that like decisions is like this, but oftentimes a lot of these no-code softwares are visual or graphically based because we want you to be able to put things together visually or represent them the way they actually work. And then the code works behind itself in the background to accomplish the tasks that you've visually laid out. So who are citizen developers? You're going to hear this a lot in our industry, this concept of citizen developer. So a citizen developer is really what we like, or as Eric liked to call them, the subject matter experts or SMEs. This is just a series of people that are experts in a particular discipline. It could be finance, it could be loan origination, it could be, let me give another good one. Healthcare coding, things of that nature. They're experts in a discipline or a domain, and they have an intimate firsthand knowledge of the operation or task within the business that needs to be operated or automated. But the challenge we're having here is that CDs, citizen developers, are altering the project economy. So the project economy is the workload within a certain within your enterprise or within your company, right? They're altering that dramatically. Okay, so there's a couple things that go along with this. One of them is they're increasing capacity, right? So most application development is done by the dev shop or IT, your information technology department. So these citizen devs and these low code, no code tools are actually giving you capacity. They are allowing you to increase the number of applications you can develop and work and get into production quickly. They're increasing the speed of that solutions development. But if you've read any books about citizen development, you also understand there's kind of a dark side to this too. And that is that most non-coders don't understand some best practices around coding. So that is something that we also take into account in our training. When you go through the dev course, you are given a lot of best practice, like what are some of the ways to prevent certain things from happening? Why do we structure? Why do we encapsulate or compartmentalize our logic and things like that? There's a lot of best practices from a coding standpoint that are also incorporated into low code software and no code. And it's just to maintain some of the structural and developmental integrity that comes out of that. Because again, citizen developers, if you're a healthcare analyst, you may not understand why it's a good idea to do certain things. So the powerful thing about low code, no code is that we're giving you tools, we're making you a part of the application development and process, which is, again, increases capacity and speed of solutions development and employment. But we also have to make sure that we're doing that in accordance with best practices. So low code, no code software empowers citizen developers to turn their ideas, right, their knowledge and their firsthand knowledge of a process, it allows them to turn them into applications and then improve upon their work and then better serve their customers. So this is kind of that marriage of low code software with that citizen developer, is that I'm taking the person who knows the most about a particular process, I'm giving them the power to automate and develop an application that improves their work, that improves the quality of their work, it improves the whatever metric you're trying to measure, whether that's fast, reduction of errors, speed, efficiency, things of that nature. And then that is going to translate to better service of your customer. And we all have customers. Even training, I make that joke. Eric and I talk about that all the time. Training has customers, right? Everybody has customers. Who that customer is, right? We want to better serve them. So one of the things you're going to hear a lot about is this code gap. And it's really, really interesting because as the demand for coders, as you can see this green line here, starting around 2021, this gap between the actual supply of coders in the work environment, that demand is increasing exponentially. But the number of people that are actually entering that as a skill for jobs is not growing with the demand. And that's creating an opportunity. That's what's creating this opportunity in the low code, no code space with citizen developers. So Gartner predicts that in just 2 more years, citizen developers will outnumber professional developers. So if you are a business analyst sitting in this class, you've never coded a single application in your life, the fact that you are going to learn this software and then go out and employ it to make your business better, what they're predicting is that by 2023, citizen devs will outnumber professional devs 4-to-1. Now, what I will tell you is there will always be a need for both, right? Again, we're not trying, this is not my pitch to say that we don't need devs anymore. No, what I'm saying is that low code, no code software increases their capacity. It's giving them most organizations agility. It's giving them speed, increasing capacity so that you can get to production and service your customers faster and better. There will always be a need for both shops, but this is where low code is trying to fill that gap at. There's actually a really good book out there that PMI puts out on citizen developers, and it actually talks about how to integrate those two halves, where if you have a business analyst shop making applications, and then you have a traditional dev shop, talks about how to manage the projects so that they, in between those two shops, to get the best product out of both. Pretty good book if you get a chance to check it out. Okay, so let's talk about the low code, no code landscape as it's going to go forward. And again, this is important for you because it gives you an idea of kind of what's coming in the next few years as far as projects and products. So hyper automation, which is just RPA on steroids, right? That's the new focus, is we've got to get faster. And the funny thing is, I promise you that once you make an application for your enterprise in Decisions and you start using it, the next thing will be is how do you iterate on it? How do you make it faster? How do you make it better? The need for application development and implementation is one of the top 3 drivers in low code software adoption. So that's kind of it's one of the 3 things driving adoption of low code software, is that people are trying to get faster. We're trying to get more capacity and service customers better and faster. By 2025, 50% of all of the low code buyers will be business functions outside of IT. So what we're even seeing is that there's a lot of our customers who are not from the IT or information technology realm, meaning that it's not their IT department that looked for Decisions, right? Their IT has a dev shop. They can make their own applications. It's the business functions outside of IT that really need to leverage low code tools so that the process owner is that citizen developer, that person who's the expert in that domain, can have more control over the development of the application that's going to serve their process. And then by 2025, 75% of the enterprise, so 75% of the companies that are out there are going to have at least 4 low-code citizen innovation applications. So you're going to have 4 tools, almost 4 tools. Now we think, obviously, most people on this call are customers of ours and know that our tool is very, very, very capable, and that's why we find it very important that you get this training. So that's the basic overview of BPMN, low code, no code. That's really, it was just a down and dirty kind of what is BPMN, what is it, how does it compare to RPA, low code, no code as kind of an industry as itself, what's the purpose and functions behind it, and then how does that play when you think of these concepts from a business analyst standpoint in your organization. And so just again, understanding that this is only going to get bigger. These markets are only going to get bigger. They're expecting that the number of people that that our citizen devs are going to outnumber traditional programmers by a large number, by 4 to 1 in a very, very short amount of time. And that's simply because these tools, even though there is a learning curve to them, all of these tools, these business process automation tools, are going to give you capacity. They are going to give you speed. They are going to increase your operational agility. So I'm going to take a second here to go, are there any questions from any of the students about business process management, RPA, low code, no code software, citizen developer, those kind of initiatives? And if not, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it over to Eric and say, Eric, did you want to add anything while we're here on this topic?
No, I think for now, that's a really good introduction to it. I think this conversation can go a bunch of different ways from here, looking at kind of, like Brian mentioned, market analysis, the citizen developer kind of patterns and the ideal role for that type of thing. But those are things that I'd offer that if you want to have those conversations, let us know, shoot me an email, and that's something that we can go ahead and set up at another time. But yeah, I think for now it's a good time to transition over to Randy, and we can start looking at the decision platform tool and use cases and some other things here.
All right.
Oh, let me stop share, Randy, sorry. There you go.
Here we go. So for the rest of the afternoon, I'm going to start out by giving you a little overview of Decisions as a company and over the tool itself before we actually log in and start looking at working in Decisions of the project that we're going to be doing over the rest of the week. So first, just a brief introduction to Decisions, and I do mean a very brief history of Decisions as a company. So Decisions was officially started in 2010. Now, prior to this, our timeline actually starts before that, back in like the late 90s, when our founders, Heath and Carl, started founding companies together. They were developers. They liked to build and create things, and they actually loved working with business process management and rules engines, the exact same things that make up the foundation of Decisions today. So they actually ended up founding a couple of other companies that had to do with work in a similar space. And they ended up being bought out by Symantec at some point. They were offered very cushy jobs to be developers, to work in the tool that they had built with the company who had bought it. And then they decided that they would rather break out for themselves. And so they started Decisions in 2010. So after doing that for a while, they had decided they didn't want to work for anybody. They wanted to have their own company, do their own thing. At a certain point, they had been making back-end middleware, more or less, using rules, using business process management to integrate with other systems. So they would work with individual companies who needed these kind of integrations, who needed this kind of automation, and build custom tools for them. And around 2016, they realized that they had built out quite a hefty suite of tools that could be applied to a lot of different kinds of industries, and that they didn't need to necessarily court individual companies and build custom solutions for each one of them. They could create a tool that could be used by any industry, by any company, to automate their business processes and integrate with other systems. So they decided to buy some AdWords and put some feelers out to see if there was a market for this product, and it turns out there was. Fast forward a few more years, in 2019, they had a choice to make. Business was going well. They were liking the way the Decisions was going, but they decided, hey, is this going to be something that you and I do as a passion project, or is this something that we want to turn into a big brand and make it a bigger thing than just the two of us? And so they decided that they did want to shoot for that to be $1 billion brand. They wanted to find 1,001 happy customers. And so they partnered with Aldrich Capital Investments as a strategic investor to boost the company and continue growth. Also in 2019, Bob Erdwin was hired as our CEO. And throughout 2020, when a lot of businesses were taking downturns, things were not going super well, decisions continued to grow, and it grew an awful lot during that time, to the point where in 2021, we've moved into our new world headquarters here in Virginia Beach, Virginia. It's an enormous space with enough room for all of our staff and more as we continue to grow. So that's the company. Now, Decisions also shares its name with the product itself, with the tool that we're going to be learning about over the rest of the week. So we're going to go ahead and pivot into learning about the tool here. So what is Decisions? It's a web-based application that allows you to use graphical inputs like the ones you see represented on this screen to automate business routines. You can set up user interfaces, rules, and flows, which are like scripts, to assemble a process together to automate any kind of work. We're going to talk about use cases in a few minutes, but I usually like to ask, so what do people, what are you thinking that you could build in Decisions? And I haven't heard any answers yet that couldn't be done. Just about anything is possible in this tool, as long as you're willing to take the time to build it out the way you want it to be. So when we build in Decisions, it looks like the graphic that we have on the slide here. We arrange icons on a canvas. They move sequentially, and each of those icons processes or performs a bit of code. Each one of those things is a function or a method. It does its single individual job that, when they come together, forms our automated process. So Johans asked how many people are working at Decisions. I don't think, 214. Thank you, Kristen. So there we go. So to do this, to create these graphical applications like we see on the screen, we use our 5 graphic designers. We're going to go over each of these individually starting tomorrow. But we can create flows, forms, rules, reports, and pages. And we can use those 5 designers to create robust end-to-end applications or simple integrations that go in between 2 other processes. So this can be as big or as small as we need it to be to suit whatever function we're trying to solve. And you do not have to be a programmer to have success with the tool. What you see on the screen is exactly what it looks like when you're building in Decisions. You can use code if you so choose to. We've started trying to encourage people not to fall back on past coding background to fill in gaps. We're going to teach you an awful lot about how to work in this tool. And at times you may be tempted to say, well, I could do this in some other language. And you could absolutely do that. And then and Decisions can work with it. However, all of those things, it's very, very rare, I think, to come across a solution where we would absolutely have to, where we don't have steps built into the tool that can be used to supplement or to replace that coding work that you would have done. There we go. And yeah, absolutely, Deepak, we're going to put all the slides, make all of those available for you. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. So some examples of how Decisions can be used. So our rules engine is kind of the central tool behind Decisions. This was one of the key features that Keith and Carl first came up with, and it is one of the backbones of the Decisions product. So our rules engine is a place to centralize business logic and to expose this logic to business people to maintain and edit. So we can, as developers, those of us in this room are business analysts, can create rules that apply to real world situations that we need to affect. So if you work in healthcare and you're trying to determine, which patients need to receive, which kinds of checkups on what kind of basis, what those rules are. You, as the individual who actually manages that process, knows what those rules need to be. And our business rules give you the ability to create those for yourself and then implement them in the tool. Workflows are the other kind of backbone of the decisions product. So in accordance with rules, we can create workflows that work just like a flow chart that you might see to help you plan out what a process should look like, except that each of the icons on the flow chart actually execute code. They actually do a job. It's not just a representation of how this process should be. It can serve as that function, but it also will actually do the process. So, and as opposed to using other older sort of programming languages to script things together or write big code applications to do those things, we can create workflows visually, graphically laying out all of our different steps, including rules, to automate a process. Decisions is also great for batch processing. So we do a good deal of work pulling data from various systems, making data conversions, running rules, and then putting this data into other systems. So we can import numerous numbers of records, and I'm going to give you some examples of this in just a few minutes. And decisions can handle executing all of that either one at a time or in a multi-threaded or batch processing environment to keep up with the needs of your business. Decisions is also integratable. And so these two circles here, so the extend and expand and system integrations. So decisions can sit off to the side of other applications, integrate with other data sets that you already have available, and automate custom business processes, as well as integrate with all sorts of other applications as needed. So any other application, be it Salesforce, Zendesk, whatever you use every day in your business, if it has an open API, decisions can integrate with it and can pass information in and out of it. So you can use the tools that you already like and use decisions to enhance and bolster the productivity that you can get out of those tools. So a few more technical details. So all of these come down to flexibility and how you can use decisions. So it's a web-based tool. It's housed either on a local server or in your preferred cloud environment like Azure or AWS, and it's accessed via the web browser. That means that it's already ready to go mobile friendly. And of course, by using APIs, you can integrate it with any other system that you're already using. For data storage, Decisions uses its own Microsoft SQL Server at the server level to store and record its own data, but you can also engage external databases. So if you already have a database that you're using with your organization or any other external database that you need to connect to, Decisions will integrate with that. As I mentioned before, for deployment, you can have an on-premise server if that's what you prefer. You can also do cloud hosting through popular services like AWS and Azure. And of course, our licensing is available with software as a service. So a few more technical details, just some extra things that are available in Decisions, but may not be part of your default install. So Decisions comes with something like 20,000 or 2,000, steps in the steps toolbox that you can use that have already been built out by our Decisions developers to build out your automated processes. However, there may be other integrations that not everyone needs, but that are still have been made by us that are available to you in the Decisions App Store. So things like DocuSign. Allowing you the ability to push and pull documents and signatures using the DocuSign tool. Salesforce, an ever popular integration. And telephony. So some of these things are already built into Decisions, and some come as modules that will tell you about how you can install later. So pivoting now, I think that that's enough of talking about the tool. Let's actually look at the tool. So everyone prior to today should have received an email from Jada letting you know all of the details about this class and how to access not only this course, but also your Decisions instance. So in that email, you were encouraged to do a local install of Decisions if you could. That's not possible for everyone. We know that some companies don't allow people to install software on their laptops. Other technical considerations may have come into play. But in that same email, there will have been a link and login credentials for a training instance of Decisions that you can use throughout this week to build along with us. So I just want to do a quick round with everybody. If you do not have either of those instances, either one that you've installed locally or the one that Jada shared with you in that welcome email, please post in chat so that we can get you some assistance. And yeah, like Eric says, it does need to be version 7.6 or newer. So if you need assistance finding that email and getting into that training instance, go ahead and post in chat now. Cool. Chris, that install process does take a while. If you want to go ahead and use the training instance for this week, cool. So for anybody who had trouble installing, no worries. Go ahead and use that training instance. If you're trying to get into that training instance and you're not able to, like I do see one here, someone who needs some assistance with that, go ahead and let us know in chat so that we can get you some assistance with that. Cool. So while that's happening, I'm going to go ahead and start talking about the Decisions portal. So this is Decisions, what we see on the screen here. This is what the tool looks like. What we're seeing here is actually the user interface portion of it. It's got a blue bar at the top, and this is what it looks like when users log into Decisions to begin work. So over on the left, we have a folder tree. This is kind of our home base, whether you're logged in as a user, developer, or an administrator. We have this folder tree over here on the left. Just about everything that we need to work with in Decisions lives over here. Every user gets a personal inbox, and any projects that we have either created or have access to are going to show up as folders over here in this folder bar. Now, what those users get access to depends on their role. So by default, Decisions comes with 3 roles. You as the business analyst or as developers can add additional roles and groups to give a much more bespoke level of permissions or access to individual users or groups that you need to. But out of the box, Decisions comes with these 3. So there are the end users. These are the folks who are working tasks, submitting requests, initiating processes, viewing reports. End users don't necessarily create things. They don't administrate anything. They are the ones that the designers create the processes for. These are the people who actually click the buttons once the developer has put them into place. So designers are what we call our process developers. So designers are folks that create flows, forms, pages, and reports. They build out processes that are then used by the end user. And administrators manage users, grant permissions, schedule jobs, and set up portal functions. So administrators are the administrators for the Decisions server instance. They have all of the keys to the kingdom. They assign roles and permissions to other designers and end users, and they have a slightly elevated level of access from designers to do more server level tasks like scheduled jobs. So authentication is done by a login. Every user who needs to run a process needs an account. So that's true for all of us when we're building out, where we each have accounts. That's what we're getting sorted out over here in chat right now. But also any of your users who need to log in and take action on the processes that you're building will need an account. So you can create accounts in Decisions where you go in as an administrator with administrator access, an account with a password for them that's only for this Decisions instance. But the more popular option is to integrate with your normal login process for your organization. So with something like Active Directory or SSO through tools like G Suite or Microsoft Azure. So whatever system your organization is currently using for user management can be integrated with Decisions so that you don't have to create additional logins. And permissions can be inherited, roles can be automatically assigned, and everything is easier for you as the system administrator. There can also be guest accounts. So the guest account is not enabled in Decisions by default, but there may be times where you want to make a process publicly accessible. So say, for instance, if I'm trying to do a lead generation form and I want to collect information from people, from prospects who are not currently, I don't have their information, they're not in my Salesforce, they're not currently on my radar, I don't know who they are. I would enable that to be guest accessible so that someone without a user account could complete that process. Permissions are inherited by group membership. So in addition to the 3 groups that we've already gone over, users, designers, and administrators, you as business analysts will probably want to create additional groups to give more restricted or customized access to individual roles within your organization. Here we go. So let's go ahead and get signed in. It looks like we are working out all of our login issues. All right, so everyone, please continue that. If you're not able to get signed in, go ahead and continue to engage in the chat. Let's make sure that we can get everyone access. I'm going to go ahead and show you around in Decisions. So this is the login screen. It looks a little bit different from the one that's in the slide. The one that's in the slide, I think, is from version 6 or previous, but this is Decisions version 7 that we're going to be working in this week and for the rest of our training time together. Nice, pretty login screen. You're going to use the credentials that were sent to you in that email, or the ones that you're getting from the chat. And once you sign in, you're dropped into your default user space. So here, I am in the Decisions Studio. It has an orange bar at the top. And this lets me know that I am signed in as a developer. I have access to create things from this interface. So if I do up here at the top left, switch to portal, my bar turns blue and I am now in the user space. So that's the differentiation between the portal and the studio. This is for end users, and you'll notice that I have far fewer options over here in my folder tree. I have my inbox, that's just for me, and a few folders, but not nearly as many as I do when I switch to Studio. So all of these things are available to me as a designer or as an administrator, but are not made available to end users. So we can't see them here in the Studio, or in the portal, excuse me. So everybody, if you aren't already, go ahead and switch into the Decisions Studio, and we'll take a quick look around. All right. So the first thing we want to talk about is folders. So like I mentioned, everything that you do in decisions is going to live in these folders over here on the left. So each of these items that you're seeing, most of them are projects that I've worked on. This is my local decisions instance on my laptop. Most of these are projects that I've worked on that all live in folders. If I expand these, there are nested folder trees within them. And this is how we organize our projects. So everything's going to live over here in one of these folders. Down below, we have the system folder. And this is available to me out of because of my administrator privileges. And this is where all of our system administration happens. So everything in Decisions lives in a folder, including our system administration. We do that down here. For instance, if we wanted to mess with accounts and groups like we were talking about previously, I would go to System and then Security and find my accounts here. So there are two types of folders, and there are a mix of them in the folder tree that we can see. But we have designer folders and standard folders. So a standard folder is just a place to put stuff. This is a box to put files and other things in. It is storage. It works just like a folder that you would see in your local desktop operating system. It's a place where you can put digital things that you need to store somewhere. We also have designer project folders. So these are where decisions designers can create decisions elements. So I'm going to create, let me move this. Man, did it again. Here we go. So I've created these two folders. So this one here, this is my designer folder. Up at the top, we have our designer folder actions. And this is where our users are not our users, excuse me, but our designers, our developers, all of us business analysts can create decisions elements. So up here at the top, we have create flow, create rule, create form, report, data types and integrations, design patterns, etc. So all of these are actions that I can take within this folder to create decisions elements, to do the work of development. In the regular folder, however, I get no such actions. There's a lot less going on in here. So this is just a place to store things. And this does become useful and necessary in a lot of instances in decisions to just have a folder to put things in. However, anytime we want to do any kind of development, we want to make sure that we're using designer folders for that. Go. And so for this week, let's go ahead and create, everybody who is able to get into decisions and as soon as we're able to catch up, let's go ahead and create a folder for ourselves that we can use for our project that we're going to be working on this week. So in your Decision Studio, we're going to, you can either click the Add Folder button up here at the top, or you can right click on any of the folders that already exist and click Create Folder. And we're going to create a new designer project folder for your project that you're going to be building this week. So I'm going to call mine October PA purchase request, because that's what we're going to be building, is a purchase request system. And I'm going to go ahead and select the Add at Root checkbox down below. That way, this folder isn't going to end up nested inside one of my other folders like you saw me do before. It's going to create it at the root of my folder tree so that it becomes one of these kind of home base folders that the rest of my project is going to live in.
Another thing to do to make sure you guys add when you name your folders, since this is a shared environment, please put your initials after or before the naming, because if you all name it the same thing, then it's going to be very confusing when you try to find your own project. So name it the way Randy has showed, but then also add your initials afterwards so you can distinguish between your designer elements and your fellow classmates' designer elements.
Cool, cool. And so once you have your first designer folder, we're going to create a few additional ones. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a folder scaffolding that we can use to house the different elements of our project as we create them over the course of the week. So I'm going to create another 5 folders inside of this one that I'm going to use to house all of the other stuff that I'm going to create as part of my purchase request project. So I'm going to create another designer folder. Call it flows. And I'm not going to select at root this time because that one's going to go inside my purchase request folder as a subfolder. I'm just going to create a few really quickly and then I'll leave them up on the screen so everybody can copy as well. Here we go. I think I said 5, it's actually 6. 6 subfolders inside my project folder. So each of these is going to house different elements that we create as part of this project. So data structures, flows, forms, pages, reports, and rules. All right, it looks like we're still working out some user accounts, but I'm not seeing any questions about folder creation. So I'm gonna, does anybody need any assistance with that? So Trevor asked, how do I rename a folder? Great question. So if we make a typo or something else that we want to change, if you right click any of these folders, you get a bunch of actions for how you can interact with those. And for that, under manage, yep. And so down here under manage, there's a sub menu. And one of the options toward the bottom is set name and description. Bear with me just a moment, everybody. Fighting with my computer a little bit. All right. So if you would, go ahead and take a look in the Zoom chat. I just shared with everybody the guide that we're going to be using for the rest of this week to build our purchase request system. So throughout the week, I'll try to keep up with what page we're on and make sure that we stay together. But this guide is going to take us through from start to finish the project that we're going to be building. And in fact, if you take a look on page 3, in a different way. So if you take a look on page 5, it walks you through the process that we just did of creating your folder scaffolding. So the project folders, designer folders that all of your decisions elements are going to live in. Here we go. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here. So before we get into the rest of, and so that's in the Zoom chat here, Kristen. If let me put that back.
It's also, I'm going to share my screen. Kirsten, it's also in the LMS. So I'm going to show the student perspective. So if you're logged in as in the LMS, you're going to see when you click on the business analyst course, we have this view here. If you go to the decisions business analyst 5-day course, then immediately what you're going to see is you're going to see an overview and then a content. So if you want to get the student guide right here for a download, which is what Randy has shared in the Zoom chat as well, you can do it from the Zoom chat, or you can do it here by downloading this business analyst student guide. So that's where you find it, the LMS or the Zoom.
Cool. Here we go. All right, sorry, let me find my slides again. All right, so in that guide, let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to be doing this week before we continue to talk about decisions at a high level, give you some context for what we're actually going to be doing as a group. So when we start to build out a project, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing this week, we want to ask ourselves some questions. So how does a user start the process? Which types of users or specific users are going to be involved? What tasks need to be accomplished? How does data change at a handoff? What notifications need to be sent from the process? Do I need to report on anything? And do I need any custom data structures? So some answers to those questions as we go through the project that we're going to be working on this week. So we're going to be building out a purchase request system. So we're going to have a system where an employee submits information about a request that a purchase request, some item that they want purchased to benefit their job function. We're going to use the decisions form designer to do that. It may be auto-approved. The request may be auto-approved if the item is in a certain list and the quantity is 1 or the total is less than 500. And that's going to be a statement rule that we're going to build in the rules designer. If it's not auto-approved, then we're going to choose an approver based on department and total that were given in the request by the user. We're going to use an element called a truth table for that. That's also in the decisions rules designer. A reviewer can approve or deny the request, and this is what we're going to call an assignment. We're going to give a particular task to a specific user based on the outcome of the decisions that our process has already made for them to approve or deny that request. We'll send an email to the user letting them know about the final decision, and we're going to track the status of that request in our system. We'll also provide some reports and dashboards for our users to view that information within our purchase request system. So that's what we're going to be building, and that's what our guide is going to walk us through. So as we build out elements, so like when we were creating our folder scaffolding, any actions that I have us take like that in decisions will have a parallel in that guide that we just shared with you. So creating the folders, that's on pages 5 through looks like 7 in my PDF at least. To create the folder scaffolding. So as we go, I'll try to remember to call out page numbers. And if you would like to follow along in the guide to get that additional context for what we're doing in addition to what I'm doing up on the screen, that may be helpful. Here we go. So, but for now, we've been introduced to the portal. We've seen some very, very basics about what it's like to log into decisions, and we've created some folders. Now, in later sections, we're going to go into each one of the decisions designers, and we're going to show you how to create those elements within the tool itself. But before we do that, we've talked about the project that we're going to be building. Let's talk about some other projects that other customers have built in decisions or had us build for them to automate their business processes. Here we go. So some decisions use cases. This is a small selection of use cases that we've collected from customers who have given us permission to share what they're doing with our product. It's by no means a comprehensive list. This is not the coolest examples necessarily, but these are ones that we think are representative of what our customers are doing with the product, and customers who have allowed us to share what they've done with all of you. So what is a use case? The use case is a description of how a person or organization actually uses a process or a system to accomplish a strategic goal or mission. So we have several slides of examples. So the Arizona Department of Transportation is using decisions to calculate vehicle registration fees. They use complex flows and rules integrated with legislative rules to determine dynamic fee structures. So they went to what the laws were there in Arizona and said, okay, well, the law says that if X is true and Y is not, then the cost of a driver's license is D amount. And we're able to build out all of those things in decisions so that a human being didn't have to make those evaluations. Candor Technologies automates the loan underwriting process by utilizing a series of integrations to external platforms such as Tata Consulting Services, Amazon Simple Storage Service or S3, and the Ellie Mae Encompass platform. So here, they're using decisions to automate their loan underwriting process, but as part of that process, it has to make several external integrations. So it's reaching out to all of these different platforms, gathering and sending information that it needs in order to complete the process. Capital Bank replaced a previous system with decisions to create a credit card approval process called Apollo 2.0, which has integrations to Experian, LexisNexis, and Authorize.net. This process sees traffic up to 3,000 applications per day. So up to 3,000 applications through Capital Bank for credit cards that are also making multiple external integrations. So reaching out to Experian to get credit scores, LexisNexis, and Authorize.net to facilitate that process. So human beings don't have to go and look up a credit report. They don't have to go and look up someone's legal history. And the card can automatically be created and generated as part of that process. So Ernst & Young is using decisions as part of their global tax platform to calculate and govern value-added tax. Furness Insurance built a policy review and approval tool for underwriters and decisions, which allows easy access to queues for policy approval and automates the policy submission timeline. And Coke Supply and Trading Company uses Decisions as a single integration point for the various trading platforms, each with a unique trade structure. And so this is commodities trading. This is, not quite stocks, but I'm bad at this sort of thing. But think like trading large amounts of coffee or lumber, flour, other commodities of that nature. So Decisions ingests all of these objects and passes them downstream to downstream finance and risk systems in a canonical format. They're currently processing 1.2 million trades daily, with traffic expected to be 2 million trades being transacted daily. And finally, New Ocean Healthcare intakes health data from health aggregators and processes it through rule sets and decisions, providing recommendations on things like enrollment in certain health programs. New Ocean also uses Decisions as a job scheduler. So those are some ways that our customers are using Decisions to automate their processes, to get more out of their human labor by automating the things that they can by using our tool to do that. And it's going to be folks like all of you who build those things. It's Decisions developers, but it's also business analysts who create those processes, who know what the rules are and what the application needs to look like in order to function within that organization. So I'll go ahead and open up for questions, but I also want to know, can anybody think of anything new, a new use case that you can already think of that you want to try in Decisions? What's something you want to build? Oh, sandbox credentials issuing. Okay. Print on-demand credit cards. I actually think that's very similar to what Capital Bank is doing. I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, that's what Authorize.net does, is it actually like generates the card numbers, like they're a credit card processor. Shashudar says e-commerce based applications. That would sure be interesting. That's one I haven't thought about, trying yet. Now, I'm sure that integration with it is possible. Actually, I'd be curious to, we'll have to talk more about that. Be curious how that would work, what we would want to do with Decisions in that regard. Oh, okay, so Tina says, determine exceptions to govern data entry. Where does the product not match best practices set up? That's a really great one. So Tina, I hope that you'll come back for additional trainings. We'll tell you some cool stuff about determining exceptions in data entry and making sure that results match and how to manage that type of process. Phil says transaction monitoring, anti-terrorist financing, etc. Yeah, that would be cool. That is very neat. I'm writing all of these down, by the way. This is fantastic. Cool, cool. All right, everybody. Well, I don't see any more questions. It does look like hopefully everybody now has access. But I think we're going to go ahead and take a 15-minute break here. So let's come back at 2:45 Eastern US time. I'm going to put a timer up on the screen. And we will continue on in our decisions learning journey together. So I'll see you all in 15 minutes.
Aha, good catch, John. All right. I think I shared the right screen, right? Screen 3. I got too excited and I forgot which screen I was sharing. Okay, screen 3, introduction to workflows. So this is a term that's not really a decisions term, but it's Jared's term for the flows designer, because this is what I found out about it when I was using it, that it is what I like to call the backbone designer, meaning that when you design other designer elements like forms, rules, dashboards, pages, reports, you will notice that you will build flows to work in tandem with those other designer elements. So that's why I like to call this one the backbone designer element. You use it for a lot of the other designer elements. And that's why it's crucial in your decisions development and understanding to know how to use this one effectively, because your ability to be a decisions wizard is heavily dependent on you understanding the decisions workflow and how it runs and what the application tool uses and how it interfaces with it. All right, so with that introduction, let's go ahead and let's just start talking about the objectives of this slide and then later on the click through. The first one is to understand what is its purpose. Why do we use the workflow? What is the purpose of this? The second, we want to familiarize ourselves with the flow designer. As you've seen Randy demonstrate with the portal overview, there are several different items and interacting components that are critical to understand when you're trying to build folders and rename folders. And when you understand flows, there are also some interactable components that you'll need to understand in order to use it effectively. The third thing is we will do a simple build. That's where we will build a calculation flow. And we're just going to do simple math, simple multiplication. So for all you math wizards on the call, I'm sure you'll love this because you'll develop a tiny process that multiplies numbers together. If you hate math, well, sorry, we're going to do it anyway. All right, and then the final thing we'll talk about is testing. This is probably one of the most important ones, even though it's at the end. The reason why is because it's easy to get in your head when you're building in decisions that because it's such a graphical designer that you already know how the process is supposed to work. But many times the way you think you've developed it is not how it actually executes. So we have this saying in decisions that you need to debug early and debug often. The reason why is because you find out that there's a lot of misconfigurations that we as users design, that we forget a mapping at this place, or we forgot a step at this place, and then our application or our flow does not run the way we think it should because we have messed up a configuration in the process. So it's very important that we do not forget that last one, testing. So these are the 4 things: the workflow purpose, the flow designer, the simple build, and then the test. All right, now let's dive into the first one. What about flows? What are flows? Well, a flow is an automation piece. It's use of combining a sequential series of steps together. And those steps are actually what Rainey called in the previous class, that these are actually methods of code that gets executed in the background. But how decisions represents them is that they are these cool graphical user interactive steps. And then each step has a mapping. What a mapping is it says, hey, what is the data that I can take in? And many of the steps that take in a mapping can also output data. So not every step takes input data, but almost all steps output data. And so that's what you have to determine when you grab a step. What are its inputs? What is the data that it wants to accept and use? And then what is the data it's outputting? And then the debugger. The debugger is where we say, hey, this is how we test our process to make sure that it works the way that we expect. So that's what a flow is. It is just a graphical template that is used to connect a series of steps to execute a process. That's in a nutshell what a flow is. And it is done through a series of steps, mapping, and then debugging. All right, any comments or questions before we begin into the next slide? All right, no questions. Let's go ahead and begin. So let's talk about the Flow Designer overview. So there's a couple of things you want to know in the Flow Designer so that you can develop as best as you can. So the first thing is the info panel. The info panel just tells you general things about the Flow Designer. And what you're going to see me do is I'm actually going to pop into the Flow Designer itself to actually show you what this is. How I like to teach is I like to talk about it, and then I'm going to go into the decisions tool and let me show you it. Because it's once you see the PowerPoint and the point that it's making, and then once you go into where you find it in the studio, then you can connect the dots. So that's how you're going to see me do it. We're going to talk about one component, and then we're going to go into the Flow Designer, and I'll show you. All right, the info panel. As I've said, it's just a part of the Flow Designer that tells you some general details of the flow. So let me get out of my screen here. I'm going to go over into my Flows Designer, and I'm going to go to my Flows Designer folder, and I'm going to create a quick flow. Now, I want to stress to you guys, what I'm doing right now is I'm just demonstrating the bullet point of the info panel. You do not need to follow along and build along with me because I'm not going to be going at a slow pace. I will be going at a slow pace when we start going through the click-through. Right now, I'm just demonstrating you where to find those things that the PowerPoint is talking about. All right, so this is going to be called info demonstration. So I'm just going to show you where to find that in the flow. So this is the basic template for the Flow Designer. And as you can see on the left side of my screen, you'll see a lot of these tabs right here. They have a lot of names or a lot of words over here. And this onto the side panel right here, this is where you can find the info panel. It's the first one on the side. And now, due to you guys may being new users, you may not know all these words here are actually interactable components that you can click on. So let me go ahead and clear my doodle. And I'm going to show you how when I hover my mouse over, it highlights those texts. And the specific one that we want to talk about is the info panel. So in the info panel, you see that it just gives you general detailed information about this flow. It gives you the name, so I called it info demonstration, the owner, which is who is the person that created this flow first, and then any tags. So these tags are kind of like comments. If you ever used Evernote or any kind of note padding system, that's kind of the same thing here. You want to tag the flow as something specific to show that, hey, this is how something works, or this is its function in the overall process. You can see the behavior name, the version that it was created or modified in, and then you can see when it was created on and when it was modified by, and who even created it and who modified it. So in a nutshell, just consider the info panel as something that just shows you the generic audit trail of a designer element in decisions. This is very helpful because if you're on a team of people and you need to determine who last touched what and who edited something, you can easily find that information by clicking on the info panel. Because how we advise you guys build in decisions is you have a decisions dev team that would work in tandem together. And so this is a great way to determine who last touched what and who is in charge of what. So that's the info panel. Any comments or questions before we start talking about the action bar? All right, as my government teacher used to say, clear as mud. So I'll continue on to the next point, the action bar. The action bar is the horizontal bar on the top of the Flow Designer. This is the area that you'll find yourself using a lot because within that action bar or horizontal bar, we have a save, a checkpoint, and debug actions. There's a lot of other actions too that I'll show you so you can see, but that's where you'll find all those pieces of information to test your flows, to save your flows, and all that fun stuff. So let's go ahead and see that in the Flow Designer. So the action bar, I'm gonna use my doodler, and I'm going to, or my doodle tool, whatever they call that thing, and I'm going to hover over what the action bar is. So the action bar is this whole thing right here. It's this orange piece right here up top. And it has things like saving. So if I'm done with configuring this flow, I can save this flow. So decisions will check in its configuration into the database it's installed against and store that. So whenever someone else comes and looks at this flow, it will have the last saved configuration that was configured. Checkpoint. A checkpoint is something that we use to say, hey, I need to change my process and it's a functioning process, but I don't want to destroy it. And I want to be able to come back to a restorable state. Checkpointing something allows you to do that. You create a decisions restore point, if you will, for that particular flow or designer element, so that if you try to add something to your process and you completely mess it up and you want to get back to its original fixed state, you can then restore from a checkpoint. Undo redo is the same thing. It's kind of like the Windows Microsoft Office or Google Docs, whatever your camp that you're affiliated with. More, it's just undoing and redoing in the last changed edit. You can cut and copy, so Control C, Control V, that works in decisions. The only parameter to that is you have to make sure you group your steps. And then there's the copy and paste as well. And then you also have different views. Alrighty. The notes, so these are a lot of stuff. We're going to isolate the things that I want you to remember are these three things, right? I'm going to make the action bar very simple because this is all you guys really need to know at this moment. Is just the save, which is where you click on it, you save your flow. The checkpoint, which is where I create a backup. So before Jared messes things up, and this is before Jared messes things up. This is where I can save a previously or my functioning process before I edit and make a breaking change. And then the debugger. The third point is the debugger. This is where, remember when I said that one of the things we advise for our decisions developers is that you debug early, debug often. Well, this is where you do it. So if I debug this process right here, it's going to open up this new window and it's going to allow me to start debugging, or I can click the options here to run debugging in a different way. Most of the time, we just use the start debugger right here, and you can see if the process works or not. And as you can see, mine errored out because I did not connect anything to it. So those are the three things I just want you to remember from the action bar. Remember, the action bar has a lot of powerful tools and capabilities, but we're not going to cover them all in the business analyst course. We're going to talk about those in later ones. But the three that I need you to remember, right? Just these three things. The save, that's where I save all my flows. Checkpoint, that's where I create a checkpoint before I add a breaking change to my flows. And then 3, debug, that's where I test my flows to make sure they work. Do you think you guys can remember those three things? Ooh, we got a question in the chat. Let's see. Sharzad said, what are the 2 arrows on the left side below the screen? Ah, that's a good eye. So the 2 errors there is just the flow saying, hey, that you have errors in your flow. And these are interactable components as well. So when I left click this, it will tell you what the 2 errors are. So it's saying my start step done outcome scenario is not connected. And then it says no step and the end step has no input connections. So in summary, what it's saying is that I have not, where's my doodle tool? This done step is not connected anywhere. So that's error 1 right here. And then error 2 is nothing is connected to the end step. So that's error 2. You'll notice that once I connect, so I'm going to leave those circles there. Once I connect the done step to the end step, both those errors go away because I fulfilled both those things. So that's what is used there when we have those 2 exclamation points on the bottom and let you know what errors are still there. Deepak asked, what is the difference between only debug and profile? So let me go ahead. So what he's talking about is right here, debug and profile. So let's go ahead. I want to, let's test this. I want to see what it does. I believe, I'm actually going to write that down, Deepak. I actually don't know, but I'll find the answer out for you. Here's what I think it does. What I think it does is Decisions has a profiler that allows you to determine how fast your process has ran. So I believe when you run the debug and profiler, you're actually running a profiler session along with your debug session to capture any statistics about that particular flow. But like I said, I'm not too sure about that. That's just my educated guess on it. I'll follow up with some more senior people and find out for you and get you a better answer. But a very good question. Alrighty. Okay, so we're gonna go back into our intro to Flow Designer. All right, so we talked about the info panel. The info panel is where you get general information about the flow, the audit trail, the action bar. That's where you can save, you can checkpoint, and you can debug your process. Now, the third thing we're going to talk about is the steps toolbox. The steps toolbox is literally going to be your friend, because in the steps toolbox, you contain all of the steps that can be configured within the flow designer. So where is that found? So in the flow, see this toolbox right on the side here of the flow designer? This is where we can get a list of steps in the decisions toolbox. Now, there are a plethora, over 1,000 steps within this toolbox that can do almost anything. So one of it could be mathematical calculations. One of it could be running a complex mortgage loan application rule or complex cancer triage patient rule. Some of them are configurable. Some of them are default in the system that you can drag on and just start using. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So to access the toolbox, just hover your mouse over it and then left click it here. That's all we got to do. And then you'll have access to a couple different categories. The first category you'll see here is the defaulted favorite steps in decisions. Some of the defaulted favorite steps in decisions are like the add task step, create data, fetch entities, logging, showing a form, sending an email. These are all default favorite steps in decisions that are there at your disposal. Now, let's say I want to use one of these steps. What do I do? Well, it's pretty simple. You just left click and then you just drag onto the flow designer. Now notice when I'm holding this step right here, notice that my line highlights. If my line highlights, that means that when I let go of my left click mouse button, that my step is going to land right in between that line and it will be added to the process. Remember, only steps that are connected via the line are going to execute. If I disconnect this process here and I just connect it to the end, then decisions will just execute this path. It will ignore this step entirely, which I can demonstrate in the debugger. So you can see this path is what decisions execute. So that's an important thing to remember when you're building your process. If your step is not executing, if you have it hovered over here or in between and it's not really kind of lining up, that's because your step is not connected to your entire process. Now, how do you connect it? Let's say instead of dragging and left clicking on top of the line, let's say you put it to the side and your step looks like this. How do you add this step into this in between these two lines, or in the line connecting the start step and the end step? Well, what you do is you can hover over your mouse over the line, and you see how I have these 4 options right here. These 4 options will only appear when you hover your mouse over the line. The trash can allows you to break the connection between the line. The rotate allows you to move the line and change the line orientation if you want to. And the pencil allows you to edit the line properties. So if I wanted to overwrite if I didn't want a solid line, I could have a dotted line. If I wanted to add a label to it, I can add a label to my line. If I want to override the color, let's say, you're easily going to find out during this class, my favorite color is green. It's the best color. It's my favorite color. So obviously, since it's my favorite color, it's the best color. So I'm going to make the line green because that's cool. So I made this line a solid green line. And that's all by editing that properties via the pencil. So those are what those 4 things can do here. Now, to get this step, right, the original question that we asked, how do I add this step into this line? Well, I'm going to hover my mouse over the line. I'm going to click the trash can, left click that, and then now I can connect the done step. Notice how it snaps in with that kind of yellow, with that pinkish square. That indicates that it's going to snap in and connect to the step. So once I have that connected, I'm going to let go. And now the create data step is part of the process. And then now I'm going to do the same thing here, and I'm going to snap this in. Notice the pink square at the end. That lets you know that you've connected it. This means it's not connected, but if it snaps in with the pink square, then you know it's connected and now it's part of your process. So now that's how you can add the step. So if you can do it two ways, you can hover your mouse and left click the trash can, or another way you can do is if you left click the line and you hit backspace on your computer or on your keyboard, then it will delete that line for you, because sometimes there are some users that have trouble trying to get the trash can to appear. But if you just left click the line and hit backspace, it will remove it that way as well. So that's the steps toolbox. We just have a lot of steps that you can use. You can drag over. Some of them will have inputs, some of them will not, and you can easily configure those thereof. But all the steps that you can find, there are a plethora of steps in decisions, and a lot of the capabilities are that you'll learn about them are just kind of reps in the tool. It's kind of like anything in life. The more you do it, the more you'll get used to it and be familiar with this, with this toolbox and the power that it has. So, any comments or questions over the flow step toolbox before we go to the next section? Alrighty, so we talked about the info panel, we've talked about the action bar, we've talked about the steps toolbox. Now the fourth thing we're going to talk about is the steps properties. So when we drag a step, you can be able to configure the inputs and outputs for them. So we got one question in the chat. Can you add comments to the steps? Ooh, great question. I believe the answer is yes. I don't think I've used it, but if I go to the steps toolbox, let's say I drag create data, right? And I believe what I can do is I can look at the properties or the info. Let's see. Here we go with step information. Haha. So right here on the step information, you can add comments. So if this was a step that was, this step is to say hi to Jada because she is an awesome training coordinator. There you go. So I can give a description on what the steps functions purposes. And so if I go to the steps information, then it'll be there. So that's where you can kind of like do the kind of the programmer's way of commenting your code if you want to. There's also other decisions annotation tools you can use as well. But that's a way you can add comments to the step. You can also rename the step as well. So I can say this is create. I mean, who doesn't like donuts? Donuts, right? I mean, Randy said it can pretty much do anything. So we're gonna create donuts. I don't know if I spelled it right, but that's why I went to technology, not English. But anyway, create donuts. So I can also rename the step to be more reflective of what it actually does. So, but yes, you can add comments to it. All right, so now the next thing we're gonna talk about is the inputs. So configuring the steps inputs. So this one is going to be the basic step that you'll have in all your favorite steps in the decision toolbox called the show pop-up step. The show pop-up step, all its function is to just display a pop-up to the current user specifically. So notice that I have those two errors right here, because when I drag this step over, it says there's no configuration for the subject, as you can see here, since this is outlined red and this text is red, that there's no mapping for it. And that on the message right here, this red text here, there's no mapping for it. What does that mapping mean, right? It says no mapping, but I have no idea what that means. What the mapping means is how is the step getting its data? That's all the mapping is. And so how do you configure that? You configure the mapping for a step in either one of two locations. You can do it on this blue text that says unknown right here on both of them, or you can use the edit input mappings up top here. Both places will allow you to configure how the step inputs works and will allow you to change and edit it. So it doesn't matter whether you like one or the other. We have some decisions developers that like using the input mapping editor. We have other decisions developers that like using just the inputs right here and hitting this blue text. And I'm going to show you both ways just so you're familiar with how you can map data to it. So for the subject, let's say I want this subject, I'm going to say, I'm going to click on this, right? And notice when I click on this, I'm going to tell this show pop-up to say hi to Jada. So how do I do that? Well, when I click on the blue text, notice that I have all these options for potential input configurations for the step. What is a constant? Anyone want to take a guess? What happens if I would configure this as a constant? That is right. Alex and Jasper got it. Yeah, so you can give the input mapping a static value. Depending on what the data type it is, it will allow you to put a number or put a text or put a date. It's going to have that value no matter what happens. So I'm going to set this to a constant, and I'm going to say hello Jada. So now this step in the subject is always going to have hello Jada because that's the constant. I did see another comment in the chat that was an honorable mention. You can also click the pick as well to select the type of flow variable that you want. So that's one that will allow you to select from flow, but it doesn't give you all of the input mappings, but you can use that to select a variable. All right. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to introduce you to a new thing. I'm going to use the merge plain text editor. Now notice there are two merge text, right? Merge HTML and merge plain. What is the difference between the two? Does anyone know? There you go. So notice that from a decisions perspective, when I use the merge plain text, I get the show editor button. And when I use the HTML text, I get the show editor button. So they both look like they do the same thing. But as you can see with what Alfred and Christian are talking about, with the HTML, you can do different things. You can do formatting. So notice that if I say plain text and I do the show editor, notice that I can just type text, right? And I'm going to say Jada is awesome, and I'll say so is Randy. I'll say Brian is awesome, and then I'll say sometimes Eric. Well, I guess he is awesome too, and I can put this in here. But notice, let's say I wanted this text green. I can't do that. Let's say I want this text larger. I can't do that. Let's say I want to bullet point this text. I can't do that because it's just a merge plain text editor. Now, if I go into my merge HTML text editor, and now I can have access to a font style, to text sizes, to bolding, formatting, aligning, adding a table, linking. I have all these formatting options. So I can say, Jada is awesome. And that's not how you spell awesome, but we're just going to go with it. I'm going to have this as green because we've already determined that green is the best color. And then I'm going to say Randy is awesome. The second best color is blue. So I'm going to have Randy is awesome in blue. I'll have Brian is great too, and all that stuff. So basically I can just format my text in a certain way. So that's the difference between these two editors. One gives you rich text and one just gives you just plain text where you cannot format it. So I'm going to go, since I don't really care about the formatting, I'm going to switch to plain text. And I'm going to click the show editor, and I'm just going to say, welcome to training. I can't spell today. My goodness. Welcome to training. All right. We're going to make it through, guys. We'll figure it out. Okay. So now notice that I still have that error that pops up, right? But you saw me configure the flow step. So I should have no errors, right? So in order for the flow designer to kind of refresh or revalidate whether I've configured it correctly, you will have to get in the habit of this. You're going to click on the white space of the canvas, and then you can click back on the step. Notice as soon as I did that, that's when that validation reran and said, hey, we now have inputs for this step and it works. So now let's say I didn't want to use the inputs here on the side right here. Let's say I want to use the input mapping editor. What does that experience look like? So what that experience looks like is I'm going to left click the edit input mappings. And here on the left side of the mapping, I have access to all of the variables data within my flow. And by default, the first two you'll have are flow data and system constants. If I define any more data in my flow, then it will appear on the left side as well. And then on the right side is the step inputs. This is when I clicked on the input mapping editor. And so now what I can do is I can use the select from the, I can use these text options here to set a constant value. I have the same options that I had before. Or in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull data from my environment via variables. And how I do that is I can expand. See how I have these arrows for the constant data and flow constant data? These arrows, you'll have them on any data you create as well, or most data you create, I should say. And what these arrows do is if I left click on it, I'll have access to a lot more pieces of information. So let's say I want to display whether the user email, I want the user email to be the subject. That's what I want to do. And so what I do to make that configuration is I left click this row. So notice how it turned orange. I left click this row. And then as I'm holding my left click mouse, I'm going to drag this all the way. And notice I have this dotted line appear here as soon as I left click and drag it. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to left click drag and I'm going to move it to the subject. Notice the dotted line connected there. Now I'm going to let go of my mouse. And now you can see there is a line indicating from the left side that in the flow data current user email, that it's going to send that value housed in that current user email variable to the subject of my show pop-up. So that's what's going to happen there. And let's say for the message, I'm just going to drag the current flow name. That's what I want to display there. All right. So now that I've configured my flow, what should I do now to make sure that my flow works? There you go. I need a debug. So let's debug. Let's see if it actually runs the way I think so. So I'm gonna click debug, click start debugging, and look at that. So now I have a pop-up that appeared on the top right of my screen that says admin@decisions.com, like I configured it, and info demonstration, the flow name, which is the actual name of the flow because that's what I called it. And it displayed it in a pop-up as expected. So now I've confirmed that this works. Before I didn't know that it worked. I just knew that I've configured these values, but I wanted to make sure that it worked as I intended to, and it did. So now I can confirm that this process works as expected. All right. Any other questions over step properties and debugger? Because we kind of covered the debugger as well. All right, I don't see any. We already talked about that. That's the info panel, calculation, the action bar. This goes into some of the other stuff that we'll talk later on in our developer classes. Like I said, the main ones I want you to remember are going to be the save button, the debug button, and then the checkpoint. We'll talk about dependencies and those in more advanced classes. CSS styling today, I don't believe we will be talking about CSS styling today. That's in our more dev course. I can show you where you would find those elements and how you would add those. We'll talk about that tomorrow in our forms class where you can input CSS, but we won't be going over how to style or how to write it. We have another question in the chat. Can you customize what part of the screen that the show pop-up goes to? You absolutely can. So let me show you guys that. So let's say within the show pop-up, there is the deliver to, and I have this pop-up location. What I can do is I can say, hey, instead of having it being popping up on the side, I want it to pop up in the center. So it's more there and I won't miss it, right? Because the other way, whoops, it's easy to miss it. So now when I debug it, notice that now it's in front of me. It's on the center of the page. So you can customize the location and where you want those show pop-ups. There's also a plethora of different kinds of notification steps and decisions. There is a step called send notification to accounts and groups that allows you to customize whether you want a telephony message, an email, or a pop-up like I just showed. So there's many different types of styles that could be used. Alrighty, so we talked about that. Steps toolbox, we talked about that as well. Step properties, we talked about that. Mapping data, let's go back here. So there's a couple of things that we want to talk about within the mapping data. So the two that we primarily showed during my demonstration was the constant, right? The constant says, I'm going to set this to a value that's never going to change. If I run it the first time or the 1,000th and first time, it's always going to have the same data. The select from flow says, hey, I want to run this data, but I want to grab it from a variable. And so you can easily say, hey, whatever data is going to be housed here, I want to grab it. The select from flow, I'll kind of let you guys know off the bat, that's going to be the one that you use most of the time. The reason why is because we live in a world where we don't know what the data we're going to get is. And so we need our applications to be dynamic so that if I run a flow, and let's say I'm running a travel request process, right? Which I think is what we're building. Yeah, travel request. And let's say I want that form to auto-populate with my user credentials, right? Jared@decisions.com and Jared Rodriguez. But when Randy runs the flow, I want it to run with Randy's username and credentials. Or when Brian runs the flow, I want it to run with his username and credentials. And so due to that process being, it has to be dynamic because it doesn't know who will execute it at that given point or time. So the select from flow, just keep in the back of your mind, this is the one you'll be using most of the time because due to its dynamic nature. Ignore null. Ignore null just means that on the ignore side, it will not accept data coming into it. So we'll just say, hey, I'm just not going to accept a variable. I'm just going to ignore this information, and it allows you to leave it empty and it won't pass anything. If you use the null input mapping, that will actually pass in a database value called null, which in the context of our flows, it may not be that big of a deal, but when you're doing a lot of database integrations or integrations where that value actually means something in that context, then having a null value there is important to know what's happening. But we won't get to database integrations in this class. That's going to be in one of the future decisions developer classes. So just basically the thing you need to take away from that one is both ignore null in this context. Won't pass anything into the step. Running a converter means that you're going to take in a value and convert it into another type of data. And later on in this course, we're going to talk about data structures and what a data type is. And just to get you up to speed on what a converter does is there are certain types of data like strings, which are equivalent to text, integers, which are just kind of single numbers, decimals, which is, like currency and things like that. And sometimes we need to change a date time, which is its own type, into a text format, right? And so we, in some situations, may need to run a converter to make it where we can do any mathematical computation on it or something of that effect. So that's why we have that option there. I'll actually show you that in decisions. A simple one to demonstrate that is, let's say I want to add two numbers together, right? So I'm just going to search here. I can type in add, and I get the add step right here. Oops, and that wasn't connected. Connect this step here. Remember, I'm just illustrating the converter type. So I'm going to do some things that we haven't gotten to yet, but don't get too stressed out over it. We're going to be building together, and you'll get to see how these things work. So let's say I have a number 1, a number 2. Some of you senior decision-ites on the call may be like, why am I classifying as strings? I'll get to that in a second. So let's say I want to add those values together. Well, what I can do is I can select the string. And now notice decision says this path is invalid. The reason why is because num1 is a string. Let me highlight this because this is an important mapping concept. You always want to map in the like data types. So notice this variable is a string, and what this value variable is expecting is a decimal. Those are two incompatible types because a string is a text and a decimal is a number that can have a mathematical value or to have or can be run via mathematical computation. So, and here in this context, I would need to run a converter. And so all that does is say, hey, what I want to do is I can say, hey, run a converter. And I have a lot of these predefined converters here. And so what I'm going to do is I want to convert the string to a decimal. Notice that it already selects that converter flow. I don't need to configure it. And then what I can do is I can select from flow, num1, and then I can do the same thing here, convert string to decimal, num2, and then whatever variable I define for this, so let's say it's 5 plus 5, and whenever I debug this, and now it's going to output 10. Boom. And there you go. It output 10. And so that's how we can see that in that context, a converter would need to be used. All right. All right. So let me delete this. Oops. I don't want that text. All right. Perfect. Got some questions. What is the difference between adding the branch to top versus left? Adding the branch to the top versus the left. I'm not sure I understand your question. If you could clarify, that'd be great. The branch to the top left. Yeah, if you can add a clarifying parameter to your question.
So like which side of the node are you connecting to?
Oh, got you. Thanks, Randy, for that clarification. So it doesn't matter which side. The step just needs to connect to it in order to execute. So it could be this way, it could be this way, it could be this way, it could be this way. There is an actual class, which we'll actually talk about later on, that we'll talk about what is the best practices for your flow layout. And there is a specific layout that we want because you want to design your flows in a way that makes sense. So here it's kind of weird to have the line go to the right and then have this line cross over it. So if you hover over the orange dot, you can easily move your mouse around, left click holding that orange dot, and I can move the line around the step. But from a programmatic standpoint, it's still going to run, but but you want to move the line and organize your line in a way that makes it easier for someone else to understand and follow along with you. Could you give another practical example of when we want to use the run converter? Yeah, sure. So let's say I have a date, right? So I'm going to do a date time, right? So this is going to be date, DOB. You guys are going to be very impressed because you guys didn't know this is going to be my date of birth. And I'm going to say I was born yesterday. I know it's pretty amazing that, I'm a full-fledged man in a day, I'm just, that's just how it works, Anyway, so let's say I want to change this date into something that is not a date time. I want it to be a string because I want to display the text like 10/17/2021. But what I can do, and decisions may do this for you automatically. And so I don't really want to do too many advanced things just yet. But let's say I'm going to map. Here we go. Let's do this. I'm going to have another create data step. And I'm going to just say this is DOB, and I'm going to make this of a string type. Right? And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select from flow, and I'm actually going to grab this date. Now, this one, I don't need to use the run converter step, but what happens here is decisions will typecast the, what do you call it? The date time into the string. So that's why when I click done on this, even though they are of different types, or actually, I had another step. Oh, I gotta say, call this DOB2 because it's getting frustrated at the output side of it. So what's gonna happen here is it's gonna pass this variable inside this date of birth string from this date of birth time, and it's just going to not have the time attached to it. So when I debug this, Notice when I go into the inputs and outputs that I have this date, and it's in the date time type. But when I go into here, it's going to be classified as a string text. So what that means is I could map it into other form components or page components that expect the string data type. So I'll be able to add more clarification to that after we talk about forms. I don't want to design too many advanced things we haven't talked about yet, but we'll follow up more on that one tomorrow when we talk about forms. Another question, can you see all the inputs / outputs in the mapping or like a flow inputs? So yes, if you want to get access to all of the mapping that you can find in a flow, there is a tab that we're going to click on called the Data Explorer right here. What the Data Explorer does is it shows you all of the data that is in this flow. And going into your question, I can see what the mappings are like by clicking on any one of these variables. Notice that this DOB variable contains all of this information here, and it comes out of this create data step because that's where the arrow comes out of, and it goes into this create data to step. So that's how you can see easily where your data is going from one step into another step and determine how your data is flowing. This tool, the Data Explorer, is probably one of the most helpful ones for me because it allows us to track where our data is going and whether we have mapped in the expected pieces of information into our steps. So that's how you would do that if you want to see all the outputs and mappings within your flow. All right, great questions. Any other ones? I think we talked about that. Alrighty, I believe that is it for the slides. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our Decisions Designer and we're going to go through the click-through together. So this is going to be the walkthrough build where you'll see me build on the screen. You will follow along with me. I'm going to take it very slow so that we can make sure we're all at the same location. And all we're going to do today is we are just going to build a simple flow that does some type of mathematical computation. So if you guys ever need to know where this designer click-through guide is, it is located in the LMS. So this is so I'm logged in as a student. So I'm going to click on my business analyst learning plan. I'm going to click on the business analyst 5-day course. And then I'm also going to click on the content tab right here. And when I click on the content tab, I'll be able to download that business analyst student guide, which according to my system, I already did. I don't think I did. Let me click on it. Download it. There we go. Oh, maybe that's why, because it's not. Okay, cool. It's in my web browser. That's fine. So I'm going to be all the way on Introduction to Workflows. So this is page 7 in the click-through. So go ahead and open up your click-throughs to page 7, type in the chat when you're ready, and then we'll begin building your first workflow in Decisions. Alrighty. Man, you guys are quick. I was just trying to grab a quick drink of water. I like it. Alrighty. Okay, so the introduction to workflows. So a flow is a series of visual steps that are put together and connected to move, elevate, manipulate data. The example will demonstrate how to create a flow that is going to calculate a subtotal and a total using flow steps. So cool, we're going to calculate a total and a subtotal using flow steps. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our flows folder. So like Randy showed and I showed, you can go to your scaffold projects. Make sure you navigate to the folder that has flows and your initials, or your initials and flows, so that you can make sure that you're developing your process in your own folder and not a fellow student's. Alrighty, so the step here is select the designer project folder created for flows and locate the action bar at the top of the screen and click create flow. So I'm going to go to my flow designer. I'm going to go to my JR purchase request. I'm going to click on flows. I'm going to click on create flow. I have these two options here. I'm going to click on the one on the left. Simple flows, it's their own type of thing, which we're not going to build today. We're going to build the flow on the left. All you have to do is left click this, and I'm going to call this, let's see, what did it say? That's the wrong tab. It's select the follow, create, provide the name, calculate flow. So in keeping with our naming convention, I'm going to call this JR calculate flow. Alrighty, go ahead, and if you're not here, go ahead and press enter or click create to go into the flow designer. I'm going to pause here for a couple of seconds to wait for everyone to catch up, since we do have a relatively large class. I don't want to get people too far behind. So when you're here, create the flow. If you're in the flow designer, then say that you're ready, so I know that you're good to go. Okay, so that's the first simple thing. All we did is we created a flow and we gave it a name, and I'm going to call this JR calculate flow, and I'm going to click create. You can also press enter if you like your keyboard shortcuts. I do that frequently, where I just hit enter, and then we'll be taken to the flow designer that I've just demonstrated. Now I got to go back to the click through, and the click through is going to tell us, all right, two alternative methods of creating designer elements are located in the action menus. So my speech is already fading. Menus for each designer project folder. Access the action menu with either the right-clickable, with either a right click of the designer project folder, arrow. Oh, that's actually to the previous step. Okay, never mind. This is just talking about how you can create the create flow. We're on this step, adding steps. So now what we're going to do is, in the steps toolbox, we're going to navigate to the data category, expand the data category to go to numbers, and we're going to locate the multiply step. So here's the beautiful little graphic over here that shows you the steps. We got to be in the steps toolbox. We're going to click on data right here. Then we're going to click on numbers, and then we're going to click on the multiply step, and then you left click, drag it, and place it in the center of your designer. So go ahead and do that step for me, and you can follow along with me as I do it. So I'm going to go to my toolbox. Oops, toolbox, there we go. I'm just going to scroll my mouse to the bottom. I'm going to expand the data category. Notice these arrows are interactable. I'm going to left click data. I'm going to go to numbers right here, where we're already there. And after I click on numbers, I'll have all of this information here, these mathematical operators that I can use. And the one we want is multiply. So this is ordered by, it is alphabetized. So since multiply starts with the letter M, we have to scroll down a little bit to get the multiply step. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to move this here and place it on the canvas just for right now. So I want everyone to do just that much. Find your multiply step by going to your toolbox, expanding data, expanding numbers, and then scrolling down to grab the multiply step. Alrighty, so let's see, yep, in the flow designer, all right. So yeah, we have not configured any of the inputs just yet. And all we've done is just navigated the toolbox and displayed that step onto the canvas. So we have a question in the chat. So I request to create a folder, but it's not showing the option to design a folder, only normal folder that I can select. So the one thing you want to check, Sergio, is make sure that you're not in the portal, because in the portal you can only make normal folders. If I go to like my documents, manage or create, you can only create normal folders in the portal. So what you want to do is you're going to want to switch all the way to the studio, because in the studio, you can see designer, you can create designer folders. And so when you click the plus sign here to add a folder, and then you can say create a designer project folder. Once you create a designer project folder, that's how you can create a flow. That's actually the big thing that you can determine what type of folder you're in. If you have these actions up above, this means that you are in a designer folder. If you don't have those, then that means that you are not in the, if you don't have those actions, that means you're not in a designer folder. So I think my data folder here, I don't have any of those create flows actions. That means that I'm in a normal folder. So yeah, we'll give you some time to catch up, Sergio. Michael Garner asked, I'm not seeing my toolbox in my studio. So you're going to want to go to your flow, and it may have collapsed. So you may look like this, Michael. And so what you want to do is you want to look all the way to the left of your screen and highlight the toolbox. When you left click the toolbox, then it will appear out from the side. Some settings may have it where it's automatically collapsed, and you just need to click that toolbox button, and then it will appear and you can be good to go. All right, so go ahead and let me, if those of you who are ready, let me know when you guys are ready to proceed. I'm going to answer questions while everyone configures just dragging the multiply step onto the canvas. We have a question. Do these designer folders have only an organizational purpose? So the designer, talking about the scaffolding. So the scaffolding, yes, it is a organizational design purpose. It is the decisions best practice when you're creating a project. The reason why we do this is because it makes it easier for your fellow developers to find your specific elements in your project. So if you have someone that's going to be focusing on rules, or someone who's going to be focusing on reports, they're in a nice, neat, organized way where you can find everything. If it's not, then it becomes very difficult when someone says, hey, edit your calculation flow. And then they've spent 30 minutes to an hour trying to find that flow. When if it's organized neatly, they can find it immediately like that. Now, let's say your company doesn't like the decisions, type of organization where there's forms, flows, rules, or whatever it is. And let's say you call them core, and you have core elements 1, core elements 2, whatever the nomenclature is, it doesn't specifically matter. It just needs to be consistent. Consider the scaffolding kind of like a decisions guideline than an actual rule like the Pirates Code. So it's not like it has to be this way, but it is helpful if it is. Okay, so I believe, yeah, great question. Okay, so I think everyone's ready to proceed to the next step. So I'm gonna go back into my click through because I don't remember what the next step was. And let's see, we have optionally, okay, that's just saying you can optionally search in the search bar for it. All right, so here's the next step right here. It says, connect the start step outcome path to the multiply step. By clicking the orange arrow at the end of the done path and dragging it to the multiply step, connect the outcome path from the multiply step to the end step using the same method. Cool. So the next step is very simple. We're just going to left click drag, snap it over here. We're going to left click drag, snap it over here. That's all we're going to do. And I like making my line straight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of drag my start step down, kind of make the line even. And then I'm going to drag my red end step up here. And if you want to move your step, you can use your mouse and move it around if you want, or you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard to orient your step to get that perfect straight line that you're looking for. All right, go ahead and do that much and let me know when you guys have connected the step together. I believe the next thing we'll work on is the inputs. Okay. Oops, that's the wrong tab. I have too many tabs open. Okay. So we have done this part where we connect the start step to the outcome path, the multiply step, and then the output of the multiply step to the end step. Now what we're going to do is we're going to configure the properties of the multiply step. So this is going to be the fun part. Ooh, we got a cool question in the chat. Yes, I can show that step again. So as I answer the question. So all we're doing is just connecting these steps. So connect this one to this one and connect this one to this one. Deepak asks, is there an option to align the steps at once? So there is, you just have to be very careful with it. So let's say I have my steps kind of like this and it's somewhat, it's somewhat straight. What I can do is I can left click drag my mouse like I would do like on my, Windows screen here, where I have that kind of that outline there. I can do the same thing in decisions and highlight a group of steps. And then what you can do is you can click this align button right here. And I think it's aligned center vertically. And then it will cause the lines to be, vertically configured in a pleasing way. Now you have to be careful with this step because let's say my arrows were like this or something. And it like my step was completely messed up. And then I used it. Wait, hover it over. Align vertically, and then horizontally, and then I say align vertically. Notice now it's just weird. So you have to make sure that when you use those, that your flow is somewhat in an organized way where you have the start step at the beginning, your steps in the middle, and your end step at the end. And then when you use the align and you use the vertically, then it will get that nice, straight, perfect line that we all love to see and enjoy. All right, everyone good on this step? You got your multiply step all configured. You're ready to multiply some numbers together. All right, I was about to say, I'm going to take that as a yes. So the next step, click on the icon of the multiply step to show the properties for the step on the right side of the flow designer, then navigate to the input section. So we want to find the by value and the value. The next section, in the input section, by value and value are listed as our inputs for this particular step. These inputs need to be defined with numbers to act as the data that will be calculated as the function of the step itself. Notice that to the right of the input name, there is a blue button for a drop-down list that says unknown by default. This drop-down list contains mapping types that have different uses in defining the value for the input. We're going to use the constant mapping type. So that's the thing we're going to do. So all we're going to do, and you can use the values listed there. We're just going to set these two values to constant. And you can do 1, 2, 3, and you can do, I think it's 1000. I mean, if you want, you can do 790. You can configure whatever number value you want for the step. I'm going to choose the one in the click-through just to be consistent. But those of you who are, who like to explore, you can go ahead and put any number you want. All right, and just remember when you configure it, you'll have to click on the white space of the canvas to get rid of the validation. So let me kind of show you guys what I'm talking about. So I'm going to set this to constant. And I'm going to say this is 1, 2, 3, 1000. And if your process looks like this, right, I have configured the by value and the value, but notice that decisions is still yelling at me saying I have an error. That's because decisions hasn't revalidated the change. How we revalidate the change is that I click on any part of the white space here, right? I left click the white space. Notice that my exclamation point goes away and I can click back on the step. And now I have decisions showing no errors and it's just displaying the values that I configured there. Alrighty. Let me know when you guys have gotten that configured. So we're at this part right here, constant mapping type. Awesome. We have a question. What if there were more than two inputs? More than two inputs? Then we could, so it depends on the question. What if there are more than two inputs? So we do have steps and decisions, which I think goes to your question, that take in a list of things. And so in those areas where, let's say, it may not be two, it could be three, it could be five, it could be 50, it could be 100, right? There are steps that take in a list of numbers. Actually, a good way to illustrate this is we have a sum step, which sums numbers together, and it takes in a list of decimals, right? It could sum it could sum two numbers, it could sum three numbers, it could sum 10 numbers, it could sum 1,000 numbers, right? But that's what would happen if there's a step that takes more than a one piece of number. So that's how that would happen if you have more than two inputs. If you're talking about specifically, let's say you wanted to multiply, like I want to multiply 123 by 100 by 50 by 5 and like have a series of multiplying, that goes into another type of step that we have called evaluate dynamic expression, which is a fancy step, which we can talk about later. But what that does, I mean, we can talk about now while we wait for people. So evaluate dynamic expression. If I can spell, I think this is, yep. And so what that does is I can take in a string expression. So if I did 7 times 8 times 9 times 100 times, and I could have a string of numbers here and do it that way. And that's how I can have more than one multiplying factor if that's what you were looking for. And I believe this one will run. Let's see if I did it right. Start debug, and it did. So I got 302,400. So that's if you wanted to have multiple, mathematical things. So, okay. So now let's debug our flow. So we're going to left click the top button here. We're going to click this blue button here. And we should, if my math is right, we should get 123,000. There we go. If you want to know how I got to that menu where it shows the outputs, what I'm doing is I'm just right clicking on my mouse to get the execution of the step. Well, after I right click the execution on the step, I left click this arrow right here to get the step info, to view input data, to view output data. I most commonly will click on view input and output data because I want to see what data goes into the step and then see what data goes out from the step. So I'll left click this here, and that's when you can see I passed in 100 and 123. And I actually did not do, so my math was wrong. So all you finance people on the call, don't yell at me. That's why I went to programming and not finance, because I can't do numbers apparently. I actually got 12,300. So because I missed a 0, I thought I put 1,000. In my defense, I thought I put 1,000. So I can count, maybe just not that well, but there we go. I put 1,000 and now I got 123,000. There we go. Okay. Alrighty, how was everyone's process? Were you able to debug your calculation flow and see it multiply a number? Awesome. Good, a lot of yeses. Okay, let's go back to the click through and see what's next. Yep, we did that, we debugged it, so that's good. Debugging, yep. Okay. Let's see, step count. Yep, and this just tells you kind of the stuff that I showed you, that you can see the step count, the amount of executions it ran on the step, and any exceptions or executions that happen thereof. Alrighty, perfect. Now what we're going to do, another thing that we typically do in the when we design flows is we take in data from the start step or the green step. And the reason why we do that is because we want this flow to take in values from another flow, because a flow can call another flow. It's kind of like when your mom or your dad called you, right? And then you and they asked you to call your brother or sister, and so it was them calling you to call someone else. That's kind of like what happens in decisions. It's a flow can call another flow, which can call another flow, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how we're setting this up, setting this flow up. We're setting it up so that it can be called by another flow, by a parent flow. So how do we do this? Well, what we're going to do in decisions 7, it's really cool. In our flow right here, we have this big blue button. In decision 6, we actually had to click on the green start step, and you can do it that way as well in decision 7, but I like the big blue button. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this big blue button to determine the inputs that I'm going to pass in from this to this flow. And before I do that, let's see what I have to do. So it says select the start step in the flow and locate the flow input data section of the properties on the right. Click show editor below the flow input data box, or select setup input data, again the blue button, setup input data, and then define input data at the top of the workflow canvas. Flow input data and flow output, I can't talk. Flow input data and flow output data, man, say that 10 times fast, must be defined when data is coming into or moving out of the flow. We can build a flow and use constant input definitions for every step without the need of a flow input or output data, but this does not offer a lot of flexibility because it's just using static values. So now what we're going to do is we are going to take in 2 inputs right here. Oh, can I make this bigger? So we're going to take in 2 inputs, and I'm still young enough where I can read that. And so I will let you guys know what that says. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this input data. And when we click on this input data, we're going to get 2 options. We can pick a design pattern, or we can define input data. Design pattern is a little bit of an advanced thing. We'll be talking about that later. We're going to select on define input data. So all I did is I clicked on the big blue button. You left click big blue button, and then you left click define data. And so you should all be here. So I'm going to pause and wait for everyone to catch up. Just click on the big blue button and click on define input. All right, and this is what we call the input data editor for the flow. And what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 variables. We're going to call this the first number. That's what the screenshot says in the click-throughs. First number, second number. So right here, that's first number, second number. Oh, excuse me. And so we're going to do just this much. So if you're here, then go ahead and create 2 variables, one called first number and one called second number. And tell me when you're done with that. And then we'll go ahead and configure the type. All right, seeing a lot of dones. All right, so now the final thing that we're going to do before we leave the input data section here is we're going to click on this drop down. This is where I can define what is the type of data that this variable should expect. And so in this case, we wanted to expect a decimal. So go ahead and configure decimal on both of these variables. Because what we're going to do in the next section is we're going to map these input variables into our into our multiply step. Once you've done that, then we can hit save. Make sure you always hit save right up top here to make sure that it saved the input variables. And then you can close out of the input editor. And notice when you're done, what you should have is you should see both first number and second number in the given inputs right here of your flow. All right, let me know when you guys have that configured. All righty. Now what we're going to do is let's read the click through. Now it says, all right. Data definition, select from flow mapping. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the select from flow mapping, kind of like what I showed earlier. So our first number is going to be attached to the by value, and our second number is going to be attached to the value. So that's the next step of what we're going to do here. So I'm going to left click the step, and you can do it one of two ways. Remember, you can do it both ways. You can use the input mapping editor, or you can use the select from flow right here for that specific value. I'm going to use the input mapping editor because I'm on 7.7.1 and I love the way that our UI team has designed this thing. So I want to use it. So what we're going to do is, let's see, first number is to by value. So I'm going to left click first number, drag it all the way to by value. I'm going to left click second number and drag it over to value and put it in there. So go ahead and map your step the way I have mapped it here. And I think you're going to want to remember this catches a lot of people off guard, is if I click exit, notice that my value was not configured, right? I mean, you guys saw me, right? I configured it. You saw that I had both the by value and the value configured. But if I click the X, decisions does not save that configuration. So that's a very important thing to know, because as new users, that's a very simple trap to fall into. Oh yeah, let me start mapping all my stuff. Let me get it all good. All right, it's good. Close it. Oh no, decisions is bugged. It's not working. It's not decisions. It's whenever you configure your input mapping here, you must always click OK at the bottom. Because if you click the X or the cancel, it's going to remove any configuration. So go ahead and configure the first number to the by value and the second number to the value, and then click OK, because that saves that configuration, which you will see when I do it. By value is first number and value is second number. All right, I'm going to hover over I'm going to leave my screen here so you guys can configure yours like I have. When you've configured it, let me know when you're done and we'll go over to the next section. Alrighty, okay. Now, let's see, let's go with the click through say. Passing data to another step. Okay, cool. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pass data from one step to another step, because that is a frequent paradigm that we do in decisions, where I have data in one step, because I've multiplied a number, I need to put that somewhere else. It could be a form, it could be a dashboard, it could be an email, it could be another step. And the foundation of doing that is manipulating the outputs. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to add another multiply step to decisions. So I'm going to show you the long way, and then I'm going to show you the cool, nerdy, fast way. So the long way is I'm going to go all the way down to data, right? I'm going to go to numbers, scroll all the way down to M, and then I'm going to drag the multiply step over, right? And then I have multiply step 2. That's the long way. The fast way is I can left click this step. I can type Control C on my keyboard and then Control V, and then it will copy that step for me. Now I'll need to need to clear the input mappings on this copied step so that I can change it for what we need to later on. But that is the fast way. You can Control C, Control V the step, or you can just navigate down to the toolbox to find another step. I'm going to use the long way because I don't have to worry about removing the inputs, since it doesn't come configured with any. So I'm going to use this step, and I'm just going to attach this multiply step to my process here like this. And I'm going to leave it unconfigured for right now. So go ahead and grab another multiply 2 step. You can do it through Control C, Control V, or you can navigate like I did in the steps toolbox to find it. So go ahead and do that and let me know when your flow looks like mine, where you have a multiply 1 and a multiply 2 step. All right. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to, let's see, let me make sure. Click through. All right, passing data, another step. We're going to, all right. So now what we're going to do is on this multiply 2 step, we're going to say that the by value is 1.04. So kind of like we're multiplying a tax. So we're going to be doing that. So we're going to multiply it by 1.04. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pass in the output of the multiply 1 step into the input of the multiply 2 step. So that's what we're going to do. All right, let me clear my doodle and go back to decisions. So how we do this is one of the values is going to be, the by value is going to be constant. So we're going to do this as a constant. Type here, and I'm going to say 1.04. And we're going to put it this way. And then what we're going to do is on the value, we're going to left click this, go to select from flow, and we're going to pick the multiply 1 output. And I'm going to select this. I'm not going to click any of the available properties. I'm just going to click the multiply 1 output. And then again, just like the input editor, if I click X over here, notice that it did not save my configuration. I have to make sure that I left click multiply 1 output and I click done. And then I have to left click on any part of the white space here, the no man's land or the flow canvas, as we call it, as the actual term for it. You left click it here, and then the validation will go away. So go ahead and do that much. Your multiply 2 step should look like this. 1.04 is the by value, and the multiply 1 output step should be there. Alrighty. So now the next thing I'm going to do is, I believe we just debug. Let's see, flow output. Oh, actually, no, we have to configure the output data. So one more step. So just as we configured the flow input data for data to come into the flow, now we will need to configure the output data for data to leave the flow. Now that the first and second number have been manipulated using flow steps, they can be redefined with a different name and type only if applicable as flow output data. Cool. Okay, so now we're going to configure the output data. So that's the next step. So we're going to go back into our flow and we're going to click on the output step. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on show editor right here. Because what the end step does is once decisions or this flow hits that red end step, it's going to stop its execution, and then it's going to output any data, if there is any, to the next stage of the process, if this was called like a subflow. So what we want to do is we want to output that total and the subtotal. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the show editor and we're going to define those two variables. And I believe the subtotal and total will be of the type decimal. So we want to define it looking like this. So I'm going to go here, show editor. I want to say subtotal. Total. And this one's going to be decimal. right here, and this one's going to be decimal as well. So go ahead and do that much. And remember, when you're done, you want to always save. You don't want to click the X, because if you click the X, then it won't keep your configuration. All right, does everyone have their outputs configured? All righty. So once we got that, the last thing we need to do is we need to map then those values into from data from this flow. So if I go back to my click through, it says subtotal will be the multiply 1 output, and then total will be the multiply 2 output. So that's what we're going to do. The multiply 2 output is going to be total, and the multiply 1 output is going to be subtotal. So you can use the select from flow or the input mapping editor. I'm going to use the input mapping editor. I forgot what I was supposed to do. Just multiply output 2. Okay, 2 total, 1 subtotal. 2 total, 1 subtotal. And then I'm going to click OK. There we go. And that's how that part should look. So let me keep that enabled here. All right, let me know when you have your flow and it looks like this. You have the inputs of first and second number, you have multiply 1, you have multiply 2, and then on the end step, you have the subtotal and total defined, and the inputs for the subtotal is the multiply 1 output, and the inputs for the total is the multiply 2 output. All right, I'm getting a couple people say that they're done. We'll give people a few more minutes or a few more seconds. Yep. So if you used the copy methods, right? If you Control C, Control V, right? Notice that the names are the same. So Trevor, what you're going to want to do is notice how you can left click a step right here. What you're going to want to do is once you have that step left click, you just want to start typing on your keyboard, multiply space 2, and then press enter. And then your step will be renamed, and then it will also rename its corresponding output, and then won't throw an error. So that's why it's doing that. So, I mean, you could even rename it to whatever you want. It could be something different. It just, the reason why it's throwing you an error is because you have 2 steps outputting the same variable. And that's why it's, it's different. And that's why probably in your process, you're only seeing multiply 1 output 1 time instead of a multiply 2 output. But yeah. All right. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for letting me know. Any other questions? Anyone need to see how this is set up? I think it's, yeah. Okay, cool. I think we'd go through this, right? Yeah, okay, so we got a couple more things to do here. All right, so now when we got that configured, now you guys can start debugging the process. So once I debug, notice now I have this input here configured. Because now what's happening is I have this process saying, hey, I need to pass in some data for it to work. Or what happens is it's just going to execute 0 because right, the first number and second number are automatically defined as 0. So if I pass 0, I'm going to multiply 0 by 0, right? And then we'll multiply 0 by 1.04, which is 0, and I'm going to output 0 and 0. So we're not going to really test if our process really works. I mean, it logically executed because multiplying things by 0 is 0. I learned that much from math class, but we want to see if it actually does, with actual numbers. So when you click debug, just give it some values. So I might try 45 and 120. I'm going to start debugging. And then if I right click and then left click the arrow and view inputs and outputs, I can see that 120 multiplied by 45 is 5400. And then when I see it go into the multiply 2 step, I can see that the tax is now 5616, so 5,616. And then when I go to the inputs of the end step, I have the subtotal being 5400, and then the total being 5616. Great question. We have Alfred asked, what is the purpose of the is list when defining input and output data? Great question. So is list, all that means is that this data type is going to be a list of things, or this type of data, it will be a list. So I'm going to do a show editor. The caveat, you don't have to, no one has to follow my example on this. This is just to illustrate Alfred's question. So don't do this. Let's say I want to pass in a list of numbers, right? Number list. And making something is list allows me to configure, so numbered, allows me to configure a list of items. So now when I go into my input right here and I define, notice it says a list of integers. And when I specify it as a constant, I get this huge text box where I can define basically one number per line, a list of numbers that will be passed in. So that's all that means. See right there, I have 3, 4, 56, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's saying that that variable contains a list of things. So that's what that means. Don't save because I don't want to. I said don't save and you saved it. There we go. Oh, that's why, because never mind. I did something. Yeah. Okay. All right. So has everyone debugged their process and it multiplies accordingly and you're able to see a subtotal and a total and all that stuff? Awesome. Perfect. Now I think let's go into the click through because I think part of the click through, I think this is the last section, is going to be, that's that, a subflow example. So we're going to call, let me see. Okay, yep, that was right. So yeah, this is going to be the last section of the flows. So we're going to call a subflow example. So a subflow is just one flow calling another flow. Kind of like I said, your mom or your dad calling you and then you call your sibling, right? It's kind of like a chain of people calling someone, like telephone. That's kind of what's happening here. We're going to create a flow that's going to call our calculation flow. So that's what we're going to do as the final section. It's going to illustrate what we call subflows. So in order to do this, we need to go, do we just call it subflow? So choose debugger, create a new flow, subflow example. Okay. So what we're going to do is you guys are going to close and save out of this. So make sure you click the X, and then if you haven't saved it, make sure you hit save to save this. All right. And you should be back into the designer flow folder. Now, after we close out of this flow, what we're going to do is we're going to create another flow, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to call this the subflow example. So right here, call it subflow example. All right, that's what we're going to call it. And remember, keep your initials. So this is going to be subflow example JR because you guys are in a shared environment. So make sure you add your initials to your elements. Otherwise, it will get confusing very quickly. All right, and once you've created that, just go ahead and click enter or select create to actually create this flow. and then you'll be taken into the flow designer. So I'm gonna go ahead and click create right here, and I'll be in the flow designer, and I'm just gonna pause right here. Let me know when you guys are in this subflow example, JR or subflow example, your initials, before we begin, so we can create a subflow. All right, so here, what we're gonna do is notice we have this run subflow step. It's in our favorites category right here. And so all we're gonna do is we're gonna drag it over. Now there's no picture of it on the click through. It's excuse me, it's just sent into it's just instructed instructed here on this text. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna drag over the run subflow step and place it here. And then now what happens is anytime we have any of these like run truth table or run steps, run, notice how I have this option up above here to actually pick or create that thing. And you can see myself, you can see that when I click on the different elements that button changes, right? So I'm going to remove all the different rule ones that we have. The only one that we're going to need is the run subflow, which is that step found right there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pick a flow to run. And so we're going to hover our mouse over this button here. We're going to left click it. And then we're going to pick existing. Since we already created this flow, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can just pick the one that we've already created. So left click, pick, and then you should see your calculation flow. Now, I'm going to pause right here because at this part, it might be confusing for everyone else because since you're in a shared environment, decisions will automatically put the most recent thing that was developed in this screen here. So you may be seeing other people's flows. So that's why I advise you guys to use that nomenclature of your initials and the flow, or the name of the flow and your initials after or before it, prepend or append it. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to left click the one that is yours. And you can tell that it's that you've clicked that one is because notice how the text highlights in orange, and I can confirm that that is the flow that I've selected. Now, sometimes decisions may not show this view for some reason. What you can do is you can click on the all folders, and then it will show you all the flows that are contained within the current folder that you are in. So since I'm in my flows folder in my project, it's showing me both flows available to me at my disposal. In this case, I want to make sure I click on the JR calculate flow, which is indicated by it being highlighted in orange. Then I know that I've selected the right one. Once you've done that, then you can go ahead and click pick. Remember, if you click X over here, you did not make any configuration. You just told decisions that, hey, just kidding. I don't want to map this flow to here. So that's the issue there. So you want to pick existing, and you want to select the flow that is yours. And then on the bottom right, you click pick. All right, go ahead and do that much. And let me know when you guys have that flow picked. All right, perfect. So there's two things I want to note. I want you guys to note. So notice that I have my inputs, first number and second number. Remember, that's how I defined it. I told that flow to take in two inputs. And notice that when I'm calling it via another flow, those inputs are available to me right here. And then I also told this flow to output the subtotal and total. And notice that, look, hey, that data is being outputted in the flow that I can see right here. So notice how right now my flow is called flow unspecified. I'm going to just left click it and then start typing JR calculate flow, because I want to make sure that it is named specifically and appropriately named of what it's actually doing. So I'm going to rename it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the done step to, or the green start step to the JR calculate flow. Alrighty, that's the next thing. Okay, so that's the next thing. Okay, so let me know when you guys have got this part, where it's the JR calculate flow, your green start steps attached to it, and the done step of the of your calculate flow is not really attached to anything. It's just kind of flying, and there and hanging. Alrighty. Final thing we're gonna do. Last thing we're gonna do. We're gonna add one more step, the show pop-up step. So that's going to be the step that's in the bottommost part of our favorites category. And what we're going to do is we're going to left click, drag it, and put it all the way at the end. And we're going to connect this step up here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to connect the show pop-up to the end step. Oops. Right here. Organize it a certain way. Right here. Okay, and then what we're going to do on the click through is the click through is going to have us on the subject of the show pop-up step. We're going to have it say, congrats, your flow ran. And then we're going to have a merge plain text editor for the message. So what we're going to do is I'm going to set this to constant, say congrats. There you go. Your flow ran. You can tell I've done this before because Chrome is suggesting that I put that text there. And I think there's an exclamation point, or maybe a smiley face. I'm not sure. I'm gonna put a smiley face. Who doesn't like smiling? Okay, so I put a congrats, your flow ran, exclamation point, smiley face. And then what I'm going to do is on the message, we're going to select the merge plain text editor. That's what we're going to do. I think that's what we're going to do. Let's check. I'm sorry, I'm selecting the merge plain or HTML. So you could do either or, it doesn't matter. I'm going to use plain text editor. You can use the HTML one if you want to like put bold or do whatever you want, that's fine. And then what we're going to do on the show editor, we're going to left click this. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to type subtotal. Oops. So my caps lock's on. Huh. Subtotal. I'm going to put a colon. And then what I'm going to do is notice I have this subtotal variable right here and I have this plus sign. If I click this plus sign, now what's going to happen is that variable will populate its value into this message right here. Put enter. I'm going to say total colon, and then I'm going to hover over the plus sign. Notice the plus sign only appears when I hover my mouse over those specific sections. And then I'm going to left click total right here. And remember, you want to save this. You don't want to close this. If you close it, then you lose all your configurations, and that would not be cool. And then you click save. And then click on the no man's land. All right, I'm going to pause right there. All righty. So now to test this, all you have to do is configure some constant values for your first number and second number. So I'm going to say this is 175 or 175, yeah, 175, and I'll multiply this by 90. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to debug this. Oops, I lost my configuration. Specify go to. ignore. I'm gonna debug this. It doesn't like me. You're not able to run it? Why? All right, fine. It's being mean. Did I miss some steps? What did I miss? It looks like it is. I think I know what it is. So I'm gonna delete this step. So if you all right, if you guys are having the same issue that I'm having, basically it's saying the specified registration was not supported. Did I miss some steps here for? I don't think so. I think I got all of it. Oh, yep, already did that. Works for you. All right, if it works for you, okay, great. That's all that matters. That's awesome. That is funny. So it's just mine that doesn't like it. All right, I'm gonna try to fix it. So I think the problem is I just have the wrong run flow part. So I'm gonna try this one, and I'm gonna pick existing JR calculate file. And I'm gonna delete this one. I'm gonna put this one here because I will remain victorious. And then now I'm gonna set this 175, 90. And now we'll debug it. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Did I might have. That's awesome. I'm glad it all worked out for you guys. I thought you guys were the same issue that I had. But yeah. So that should happen. So when I debug this, you can see that you will see your notification that says, hey, your process ran. Woohoo. Good job. You did it. Congratulations. Congrats, your flow ran. And it may smile at you. I configured mine to smile at me. So, and then that's the flow design. I think that's the congratulations. Yep, that is the workflow designer in a nutshell. And so that's how you configure your flow to do something. Data Explorer. Data Explorer doesn't list the first and second number. Yeah, because it's those are not variables for the parent flow. It's variables for the subflow. So that's why they're not displayed in the Data Explorer here. But the outputs, they are, because the outputs are output here. Yep. All right, I think that concludes our lecture for today. Yep, I think that concludes all the topics we're going to talk about today. Any comments or questions over any of the material that we've covered? So we got the find recordings. So where can we find the recordings? So yes, the find the recordings will be located in the LMS. So when I go into I'm actually going to show you guys. I'm going to log out. Let me share my screen first because I know you guys can't see my screen right now because I stopped sharing. So when the recording mixes, so I'm going to log in as my Professor JRod account. Let's see. Oh yeah, so my team had a Friday sync just to see how this stuff works. Notice that here there's this recording that we can click on. Where is it? So it looks like we didn't record that one. I'm gonna go back to another previously recorded one. What will happen is when you go back to, so let's say you try to access this same class, like right now it says join webinar because the class is ongoing. But once it ends, this join webinar button's not going to say join webinar. It's going to say view recording. And so you just click on that button in the LMS and you can view the recording. So that's how it would function, and that's how you'd find the recordings. So it's going to automatically be uploaded here in the LMS. Yep. Great question. I got another good question in the chat. So question is, I signed up for the developer course as well. Now let's say I pass this one. Will I get a new LMS ID or will this one just update? So how the, I'm gonna actually show you this because this is a cool thing. Our new LMS is awesome. I know, I'm in love with it. I enjoy it. So I want to sign out. I'm gonna show you from like my student account perspective. So this is my student account. So what's gonna happen is, notice how I have both of these trainings, right? So on yours, where did my chat go? Seem just, okay, there we go. So notice I have both these courses here. So what's going to happen is, let's say you pass business analyst and then you go to decisions developer, the learning plan is going to pop up here if it isn't already. Right here, I can't use anything here because I haven't fulfilled the credentials for the business analyst course. So you won't get a new ID. It will just update. It will be in here. Well, is decisions dev course free? Yes, it is. You just sign up on the days that you can meet, that you can attend it. You do, in order to get the certification, there's a total of 5 different sprints that you'll have to do. So it takes about 5 weeks to complete. Now, what you can do is you can say, hey, I just, because, we have jobs, we live, we need to work, right? What you can do is say, hey, I want to complete like dev sprint 1 application on the last week of October, which I believe we offered at that time. And then I want to do sprint 2. I may have to do that at the middle of November or something like that. You can split those application builds up, but you have to complete all 5 to be decisions developer certified. And you do have, I think it's like a 3 to 4 month time frame to complete all 5 applications. So that's kind of how the roadmap goes for that, because that's how it's set up. And currently, all our trainings will only be offered in Eastern Standard Time and Pacific Standard Time. That's just a limitation for what it is right now. We hope, our desire is during 2020 that we will be able to expand and offer our trainings in other time zones, so people in AES time or IST time or UK time, you guys don't have to kind of spend your nights with us and make it easier on your day. But that's the whole goal. That's kind of the roadmap for the training. So any other questions? Are you going to save the chat? I'm pretty sure Zoom will save it, and it'll be in the recording if we want to. Probably, I would probably say yes. Ooh, we got another good question. Ooh, I think Brian or Eric, I'll actually toss this question over to you. What companies recognize the certification?
Oh, so any company where decisions is used, so anywhere that our tool is used, it's going to be, obviously it's going to be recognized. Our partners actually look for these credentials when they hire employees. We look for these credentials when we hire employees. But honestly, this is what I tell a lot of my students when I teach at the college. When I teach we're going to be teaching a business process management class there soon. And one of the things I've started telling my students is, if you, whether your company uses decisions or not, if you can start learning a low code, no code business process or a robotic process automation tool, I think you're getting ahead of the game. Going back to those slides I talked about earlier in the day, if you can start learning our tool, you are giving yourself a skill set that's going to make you extremely marketable in the future, because every company in the next 5 years is going to have at least one, if not multiple, low code, no code application development tools. So.
Yeah, no, thanks for that.
Is it, oh, so let's go back because there was one about like registering. So
Yeah, there was. Yeah.
even though it's already closed, Alfred, send me an email or send
I
training.
already answered that one.
Oh, you already did? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone who's already in this course and participating in it, if you would like to check or sign up for next week, just send us an email, training@decisions.com, and I'll get you added right away.
One thing I do want to add, because J-Rod was kind of talking about the LMS and all the things it offers. One of the things I don't know that I stressed enough when we were talking about it this morning is if you are trying to complete this course and get your certificate, it's a requirement of the completion of the course that you turn in your project. So if you're not building along with us, if you're not making the application, you need to go back into the click-through and get caught up. Okay, because if you're trying to get your certificate, one of the requirements is you have to attend all the days of the training. You have to take the final exam and you have to turn in your project. There's actually a component in the course for you to upload your application, and you'll have to export it as a zip, which we will teach you how to do, and then you're going to upload it to the LMS and have us look at it.
So we had another question. Is the decision developer course to be done / complete itself, or will we have webinars similar to what we had now? So it's going to be, I would say it's like it's a little different format. Brian can give some clarification on it, but what it's going to do, it's going to try to teach you kind of like our PS best practices. So we're going to give you a scenario, a requirements document, and then you are going to have to build that requirements document, reviewing a backlog, kind of like what we do here at Decisions when our PS team helps our customers or partners. And we're going to give you that. We'll have a couple of classes that we'll teach at the beginning that will teach you all the information that you need to actually build that particular project. We will also have periods where we'll kind of check in like a Scrum, task list and say, hey, what did you get done today? What did you get done? What do you plan to get done? For this day, and it will kind of help you along in that build. And at the end of that build, then you will send it to us, and then we will grade it. We will also have mentors and channels in those specific avenues where you can, if you need help, you can reach out. So you won't just kind of be left to your own devices, but that's kind of how it's going to be. So Brian, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
No, I think that's it. That's it exactly. Is that it is a little bit different format because it's more like this week you're going to find is very heavily instructional based. So you are in a lecture all days from 9 to 5. What you're going to find in the dev course is that the first day is very lecture based. We're going to give you a bunch of knowledge, and then over the next 3 or 4 days you will employ that knowledge. So it'll be Monday's all lecture, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is more self-paced. You're using the knowledge we gave you on Monday to go build the application that we expect you to build using that knowledge.
Awesome. Any other questions? So yes, the business analyst course, it gets your feet wet into the tool and you can be familiar with what to expect in the tool, but I can definitely let you know, we actually have had some of our internal hires go through our decisions developer course, because the same thing we put you guys through in the dev course, we're putting our new hires through. And you can definitely ask them that it does get more challenging and more difficult, because each application build, what we're doing is we're training you guys on how to use a different part of the decisions tool. Our previous training, what it did is just said, hey, rehash the knowledge that you already learned 3 times. And we found that to be very inefficient. So we changed this model to be saying like, okay, your first day, you're going to build an end-to-end application. You're going to build a form. You're going to do this. You're going to create a dashboard. You're going to do all this stuff. And then our second application, we say, hey, you've already shown us how to build a form. You've already shown us how to build a dashboard. Now what we're going to do is you need to set up an external integration with the database. You need to clean up certain types of data and then resave that clean data back into the database. And you have to also do that under a certain time frame of load. So it teaches you a completely different skill set than what was taught in the first application. And each other next subsequent applications teach you a different perspective of decisions. So yes, they do get harder as it goes on. However, for the, but I will emphasize, for the business analyst course, it will be, what you experience today will be the same, right? We're going to go through the day, we're going to talk through it. It's very much, I'm going to hold your hand as we go through this. So the business analyst course is not going to get harder exponentially, only the dev course will be. Because at that point, a lot of this stuff that we've talked about today, some of the basics and some of the setup, when you get to the dev course, we're going to assume you already know that. And we're going to treat you like, hey, we got to train you guys to be developers. So if you ever go into the dev course, it will get harder as the days go on. But in the business analyst course, you'll notice that it kind of stays the same. We treat you guys as, hey, this is the first time you've ever seen this tool. You don't know what it is. And we're going to hold your hand through the entire process and make sure that you understand. You can ask any question that you want. There is no stupid questions here in the business analyst course because this is where this is new to you. And we want to make sure you get familiar with the tool. Any other questions? Awesome. I'm glad you are looking forward to learning more. I'm looking forward to teaching more. So I'm excited that all of you decided to take some of your days and spend some time with us. Appreciate the kudos, Tom. I'm glad that you had a great first day. We have another question. How long does the temp license last for a local install of decisions? Eric can kind of correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's like 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. It's some length of time, but the most important thing to realize from that trial license is that even if that expires, you'll still be able to create rules, flows, reports, and all the basic things in decisions. The only thing, or some of the few things that when the license expires that you lose are the capability to access your server via the DNS name. You have to always access it via localhost, and you won't be able to install modules. And there's probably a couple of other things, but those are the big things that you will lose when the trial expires, but you'll still be able to create rules and all that stuff. Any last minute comments or questions? None. All right. Well, I would say that this is a good time to wrap up. Just to highlight what our agenda is for tomorrow. So we will be starting bright and early at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to start off with the workflow designer. Since we already talked about it today, I'm probably just going to briefly overview it tomorrow just to kind of refresh our memory, and then we'll start talking about forms, and we'll build out a couple forms. We're going to go to lunch at 12 p.m. and then I'm going to hand you guys off to Randy, and Randy's going to teach you guys rules, active form flows, and UI UX best practices. And then there'll be an end of day challenge. So that's what we have to look forward to tomorrow. So since there are no questions, you all have a great day, and I'll see you guys tomorrow at 9 a.m.